When Alpha King Dominic rejected his fated mate in front of 1,000 witnesses, he expected her to crumble. He expected tears, submission, the broken whimper of an Omega accepting her place. What he got instead was laughter, cold, sharp, and absolutely terrifying. Because Maeve wasn't who anyone thought she was. And by the time Dominic realized his mistake, it was already too late to save himself. Stay with me until the end of this story to see how one rejection brought down an entire kingdom. And if you're watching from the Packlands of North America, Europe, or anywhere wolves run free, drop your location in the comments and smash that like button. You won't believe how this ends. The Grand Hall of the Northern Court had never held so many wolves in one place. Maeve could smell them, hundreds upon hundreds of bodies packed into the vaulted chamber, their scents mingling into something thick and oppressive. Sweat, expensive perfume, the metallic tang of dominance that rolled off every alpha in waves. The ceremony had been going on for 3 hours, and her feet ached in the thin canvas shoes they'd given her from the kitchen stores. Not that anyone cared about the comfort of a servant. She stood at the very back of the hall, pressed against the cold stone wall where the shadows were deepest. This was where people like her belonged during events like this. Out of sight, close enough to be summoned if needed, but far enough away not to offend anyone's delicate sensibilities with her presence. The mating ceremony of the Northern Court was supposed to be the event of the century. Alpha King Dominic Blackwater, ruler of the largest pack territory in North America, was finally going to announce his chosen mate. For months, noble families had been parading their daughters through the palace, each one more beautiful and accomplished than the last. Lady Serena Ashford had been the favorite, daughter of the High Council's wealthiest member, educated in Switzerland, trained in diplomacy and pack politics since birth. Maeve had served them all, had brought them tea and small cakes while they simpered and posed in the drawing rooms, had cleaned up after their lavish dinners and listened to them discuss her king as if he were a prize to be won rather than a person. Her king. The thought made her stomach twist even now. The mate bond had snapped into place 6 months ago, during a random Tuesday afternoon while she'd been scrubbing pots in the kitchen. Dominic had walked past the service entrance, probably didn't even know there was a kitchen there, and the world had simply rearranged itself. Every cell in her body had screamed mine with such intensity she'd dropped an entire rack of copper cookware. The crash had been tremendous, echoing through the stone corridors like thunder. Cook had screamed at her for 20 minutes straight, while Maeve had stood there, trembling, trying to understand what had just happened. But Maeve had been poor her entire life. Poor enough to know that some things weren't meant for people like her, no matter what fate decreed. So she'd kept her mouth shut, kept her head down, kept scrubbing pots and serving tea and pretending her wolf wasn't howling itself raw every time Dominic walked by without seeing her. 6 months of torture. 6 months of watching him smile at Lady Serena during state dinners, while Maeve poured wine with shaking hands. 6 months of lying awake in her cramped servants' quarters, feeling the bond pull and ache and beg for acknowledgement that would never come. She'd thought about running, about disappearing into the wilderness and living as a rogue rather than enduring this constant agony. But rogues didn't last long in the Northern Territories, and something stubborn and self-destructive in her wanted to see this through, wanted to watch him choose someone else, wanted the final proof that she was as worthless as everyone had always told her she was. Attention, please. The voice cut through the crowd's murmur like a blade. Maeve's spine went rigid. Dominic stood on the raised platform at the front of the hall, magnificent in formal black. His dark hair swept back to reveal the sharp angles of his face. Even from this distance, she could see the amber glow of his wolf in his eyes. At 28, he was in his prime, powerful, wealthy, and according to pack law, required to choose a mate before his next birthday or risk challenges to his throne. The platform where he stood was carved from a single piece of black marble, imported from Italy at enormous expense. Torches burned in silver sconces along the walls, their light catching on the jewels that dripped from every noble throat in attendance. The ceiling soared 40 feet overhead, painted with scenes of the great wolf battles that had shaped pack history. It was designed to impress, to intimidate, to remind everyone who entered exactly how much power the Northern Court commanded. Maeve had cleaned this hall 100 times, had scrubbed blood out of the marble after dominance challenges, had polished those sconces until her hands cramped. She knew every crack in the floor, every loose stone in the walls. This place held no mystery for her, no grandeur, just memories of backbreaking work and the constant fear of being noticed by the wrong person. "Thank you all for gathering tonight," Dominic continued, his voice carrying easily across the silent hall. "As you know, this ceremony is not just a personal milestone, but a political necessity. The Northern Court requires a queen, an alliance that will strengthen our position among the packs." Maeve's nails bit into her palms. She knew what was coming, had known for weeks, really, ever since Lady Serena had moved into the royal wing and started taking meals at Dominic's right hand. The other servants had whispered about it constantly, about the expensive gifts he'd given her, about the private walks in the garden, about how perfectly matched they were in status and power and ambition. "I have consulted with my council, considered the future of our people, and made my choice." A ripple of anticipation moved through the crowd. Maeve saw Lady Serena near the front, her perfect face composed but her scent spiking with excitement. She wore crimson silk that probably cost more than Maeve would earn in 5 years. Diamond drops swung from her ears, catching the torchlight. Her blonde hair was arranged in an elaborate updo that had probably required 3 servants and 2 hours to achieve. She looked every inch a queen already. Maeve looked down at her own rough cotton dress, at the stains on her apron that wouldn't come out no matter how hard she scrubbed, at her hands, red and chapped from years of hot water and harsh soap. The contrast was almost funny. "However," Dominic said, and something in his tone made the hair on the back of Maeve's neck stand up. "Before I make that announcement, there is another matter that must be addressed." The crowd shifted, uncertain. This wasn't part of the expected program. Beside the platform, Marcus Ashford, Serena's father and the head of the High Council, frowned deeply. He was a thick-necked man with cold blue eyes and a reputation for ruthlessness in both business and pack politics. Maeve had heard the other servants say he'd arranged this match personally, had spent months negotiating the alliance between the Blackwater and Ashford families. He turned and his eyes swept the crowd with an intensity that made wolves flinch and drop their gazes. Maeve pressed harder against the wall, trying to make herself smaller, invisible, a skill she'd perfected over years of survival. 6 months ago, Dominic said slowly, I felt the mate bond snap into place. The hall erupted. Gasps, whispers, excited murmurs that built into a roar of speculation. Maeve's heart hammered so hard she thought her ribs might crack. The woman beside her, one of the lesser nobles, wearing too much perfume, clutched her companion's arm and hissed something about scandal. Further down the wall, a group of young alphas were already placing bets on who it might be. No. No, he wouldn't. He couldn't. Dominic raised his hand and the noise died immediately. The power of an Alpha King's command, silencing 300 voices with a gesture. I have spent these months investigating, Dominic continued once the crowd quieted, searching for the source, and I have found her. Maeve's wolf surged forward, desperate and hopeful despite everything. Maybe he'd accept her. Maybe love could triumph over politics and power. Maybe the bond was strong enough to overcome the enormous gulf between their stations. Maybe... Maeve Sterling, step forward. The name dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. The crowd seemed frozen, unable to process what they'd just heard. Then the whispers started, building from a murmur to a roar. Sterling? Isn't that the kitchen girl? You can't be serious. An Omega? The Alpha King's mate is an Omega? I've seen her. She's the one who empties the chamber pots. This has to be a mistake. Maybe there's another Maeve Sterling? Impossible. There's only one. The orphan. The nobody. The words hit like fists. Maeve's legs moved without her permission, carrying her forward through a crowd that parted like she carried plague. Faces turned toward her, some shocked, some disgusted, some lit with the ugly excitement of people who smell drama and blood. She kept her eyes on the marble floor, counting tiles, focusing on breathing. The pattern was familiar. White marble veined with gold, each tile exactly 2 feet square. She'd mopped these tiles so many times she could walk this path blind. One step. Another. Another. The walk to the platform felt like it took a year. Every eye in the hall tracked her progress. She heard Lady Serena's sharp intake of breath, heard Marcus Ashford's low growl of disbelief, heard the younger nobles snickering behind their hands, already composing the jokes they'd tell about this for years to come. When she finally reached the steps, she made herself look up, met Dominic's eyes for the first time since the bond had formed. The amber glow was cold, flat, empty of anything resembling warmth. This close, she could see the tight set of his jaw, the way his hands were clenched at his sides. He wasn't happy about this, wasn't pleased or excited or even curious. He looked like a man facing an execution, his own, maybe, or hers. The bond between them pulled taut, singing with proximity, begging for touch, and acknowledgement, and love. He felt nothing. She could see it in every line of his face. "Is it true?" someone shouted from the crowd. Marcus Ashford, his voice carrying the weight of accusation. "Is she really your fated mate?" Dominic's throat worked. For a moment, just a moment, something that might have been regret flickered across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by cold calculation. "She is," Dominic said. His voice held no emotion whatsoever. "The bond is unmistakable." A fresh wave of whispers. Maeve stood perfectly still, hands clasped in front of her stained apron, and waited for whatever came next. She'd survived 23 years of this world's cruelty. She could survive a few more minutes. However, Dominic continued, and that single word fell like an executioner's axe. "I did not build this kingdom, did not unite the northern packs under one banner, did not fight and bleed and sacrifice, only to throw it all away on the whims of biology." Maeve's breath caught. The bond gave a sickening lurch in her chest. A king's mate must be strong, must be worthy of standing beside him, must bring value to the throne beyond the random chance of a bond that neither of us chose. He took a step toward her. His scent washed over her, pine and smoke and winter nights, and her wolf whined with desperate longing. So close, he was so close. The bond screamed at her to reach out, to touch him, to beg him to reconsider. "You are none of those things," Dominic said quietly, just to her, though she knew the wolves in the front rows could hear every word. "You are weak, common, unremarkable in every possible way. You would make me a laughingstock. You would weaken everything I've built." Each word was a knife between her ribs. Maeve felt her wolf curl in on itself, whimpering. "Dominic." The name escaped before she could stop it. A plea, a prayer to a god who'd already turned his back. "You will address me as Alpha King," he snapped, and the dominance in his voice dropped her to her knees before she could resist. The marble bit into her kneecaps, sending sharp pain shooting up her legs. Around them, the crowd was dead silent, straining to hear every word. This was better than theater, better than blood sport. This was a real life breaking in real time, and they were drinking it in. "Please," Maeve whispered, her voice cracked. "Don't do this." She hated how weak she sounded, hated the tears that were building behind her eyes, hated that even now, even knowing he was about to destroy her, part of her still hoped he might change his mind. Something flickered in his eyes then. Regret, maybe. Or pity, which was somehow worse. His hand twitched like he might reach for her, might offer some small comfort. Then Marcus Ashford cleared his throat loudly, a reminder, and Dominic's face went hard again. "I, Dominic Blackwater, Alpha King of the Northern Court, do hereby reject you, Maeve Sterling, as my mate. I sever this bond by my own will and authority. You are released from any claim to me, my pack, or my throne." The words hit like physical blows. Maeve felt the bond begin to tear, felt her wolf screaming in agony as the connection shredded. This was supposed to kill her. Rejection of a fated mate, especially when delivered with the full force of an Alpha King's will, was supposed to stop her heart, collapse her lungs, end her. The pain was extraordinary, white-hot and all-consuming, like being burned from the inside out. Like every nerve in her body was being flayed. The bond was a living thing, thrashing and dying, and she was dying with it. Her vision went white. Her lungs seized. Her heart stuttered in her chest, the rhythm going erratic and wild. This was it. This was the end. She was going to die on the marble floor of the grand hall, in front of 300 witnesses, and the last thing she'd see would be Dominic's cold, emotionless face. And then something else rose up to meet the pain. Something that had been sleeping in the deepest part of her soul for 23 years. Something that recognized the rejection not as a sentence of death, but as an insult beyond bearing. Something old and vast and absolutely furious. The pain hit a wall and stopped. Maeve's head snapped up. Through tears, she hadn't realized she was crying. She saw Dominic's face go slack with shock. Because he could feel it too. The bond that should have been severing was instead pulling taut, snapping back like a rubber band stretched too far. It wasn't breaking the way it should, wasn't dissolving into nothing. Instead, it was twisting, reshaping, turning back on itself like a snake eating its own tail. And then it broke. Not on her end. On his. Dominic staggered backward, his hand flying to his chest. His face went gray. His amber eyes went wide with shock and then pain. Terrible, consuming pain that dropped him to one knee. Around them, the temperature in the hall dropped 10 degrees in an instant. Frost began to creep across the marble in delicate, branching patterns. Maeve rose to her feet. Her body moved with a grace she'd never possessed before, powered by something that wasn't quite human and wasn't quite wolf. The thing inside her stretched, yawned, shook off 23 years of forced sleep like a bear emerging from hibernation. And it was hungry. When she spoke, her voice carried to every corner of the massive chamber without her needing to raise it. It resonated with harmonics that shouldn't exist in a human throat, layers upon layers of sound that bypassed the ears and went straight to the hindbrain. "Did you really think," she said softly, "that you could reject me?" The wolf that had been whimpering inside her went silent. In its place, something else stirred, something that made the marble beneath her feet crack in a perfect circle, radiating outward from where she stood. The sound was like gunshots, sharp, sudden cracks that echoed through the hall. Wolves flinched and backed away from the spreading fissures. "Do you know what I am, Dominic Blackwater?" She took a step forward. He took one back, still on his knees, still clutching his chest like his heart might explode. The bond was killing him. She could feel it, the severed connection turning back on itself, devouring him from the inside out. His wolf was dying. The thing that made him alpha, that gave him power and strength and dominance, was withering like a plant ripped from the soil. Do you know why a kitchen servant has survived 23 years in a world that eats the weak? Why no alpha has ever tried to claim me? Why no dominant has ever been able to hold my gaze? Why I've stayed invisible and unremarkable despite every instinct in your wolves telling them I didn't belong? Another step, another crack in the marble. The fissures were spreading faster now, climbing the walls like veins, racing across the ceiling. Chunks of plaster began to fall, forcing nobles to scatter. "I hid," Maeve said. The tears on her face were drying, turned to frost by the cold radiating from her skin. "I made myself small. I swallowed my power and my rage and my birthright because I was a child when they slaughtered my family. Because I was alone and terrified, and I didn't want to die." The crowd was backing away now, pressing against the walls, their faces white with fear. Because the scent rolling off Maeve wasn't Omega anymore. Wasn't even Alpha. It was something else entirely. Something that made their wolves tuck tail and bare their throats without conscious thought. Something that whispered of ancient power and older magics and bloodlines that predated written history. Marcus Ashford was trying to move toward the door, his survival instincts finally overriding his curiosity. But he was moving too slowly, his wolf too paralyzed by the pressure in the air to let him flee properly. "My name," Maeve said, and now her eyes were beginning to glow, "is Maeve Sterling, last daughter of the Sterling bloodline, last heir to the Silver Throne, last surviving member of the family that ruled all wolves for 10,000 years before your grandfather led the rebellion that murdered them." The shock that rippled through the crowd was almost physical. The Sterling bloodline, the original royal family, the ones who'd ruled before the Great Rebellion 70 years ago, when the noble houses had risen up and slaughtered them to the last child. Except not to the last child. She let the power out. Not all of it. Not even close. Just enough to make her point. Her eyes flooded silver, not the yellow gold of a common wolf, but pure metallic silver that glowed like moonlight, like mercury, like molten starlight. The air around her began to shimmer with heat that had nothing to do with temperature. Reality itself seemed to bend near her skin, warping and flexing like she was pulling at the fabric of the world. And the pressure that had been building since she'd walked into this hall finally released. 300 wolves dropped to their knees simultaneously. Not bowed. Dropped. Crushed by a dominance so absolute it bypassed choice entirely and went straight to the animal hindbrain that knew predator from prey. Knew when something higher on the food chain had entered the room. Knew when resistance meant death. The sound of 300 bodies hitting marble in unison was like thunder. Only Dominic remained standing, and only barely. He was shaking, his wolf torn between submission and the desperate need to fight. His alpha power, formidable as it was, shattered against hers like waves against a cliff. Like a candle trying to outshine the sun. Blood began to drip from his nose. The strain of trying to resist her dominance while his wolf died inside him was too much. His body was tearing itself apart. "You rejected your queen," Maeve said. She smiled then, and it was not a kind expression. It was the smile of something that had waited 23 years for this moment, that had endured poverty and humiliation and endless grinding labor while planning this exact revenge. "Congratulations, Alpha King. You just destroyed yourself." She could see it happening in his eyes, the bond breaking on his end, the connection severing, but not the way it was supposed to. When a fated mate was rejected, the rejection had to be accepted or it killed the weaker party. But Maeve hadn't accepted, couldn't accept, because she was stronger than him. So much stronger that the very concept of him rejecting her was laughable, which meant the rejection was bouncing back and Dominic was effectively rejecting himself. His wolf was dying. She could smell it, the slow death of the beast inside him, withering and cracking like a tree in drought. The amber glow in his eyes was fading, being replaced by ordinary brown. Human brown, powerless brown. He'd survive, but he'd be broken. Half of what he was, forever. A king without a wolf. A joke. A cautionary tale. The justice of it was beautiful. "Maeve," Lady Serena's voice cut through the shocked silence. She'd managed to get to her feet somehow, was standing near the platform with her hands clenched at her sides. Her perfect face was twisted with rage and disbelief. "You can't do this. You're not. This is insane. You're nobody. You're nothing. You can't just—" Maeve turned to look at her. Just looked. Serena's words died in her throat. Whatever she saw in Maeve's silver eyes made her take an involuntary step backward. "I am the Silver Sovereign," Maeve said quietly. "I am the bloodline your ancestors spent 3 generations trying to eradicate. I am the wolf your grandfather had nightmares about, the power your father paid blood mages to suppress, the throne your pathetic king was too blind to recognize." She walked down the platform steps. The crowd scattered before her like leaves in a storm, wolves scrambling over each other in their desperation to get away from her. Some were weeping, others had lost control of their bladders from pure terror. The instinct to flee was overwhelming, but her dominance kept them pinned in place, forced to kneel and watch and bear witness. "For 23 years, I served you. I cleaned your floors and washed your dishes and kept my head down while you spit on me and called me trash, while you worked me until my hands bled, while you treated me like I was less than nothing." The cracks in the marble were spreading faster now, following her footsteps, climbing the walls like veins. The torches were guttering out one by one, their flames unable to survive the cold that radiated from her skin. The only light in the hall came from her eyes, silver and cold and merciless. "I could have killed you all 1,000 times over. I could have burned this palace to bedrock with a thought. Could have torn you apart with my bare hands and fed your remains to the crows." A woman near the front, one of the minor nobles who'd always been particularly cruel to the servants, sobbed openly. Maeve remembered her, remembered being slapped across the face for serving tea that wasn't hot enough, remembered being forced to clean the same room 3 times because a single candle was crooked. "But I didn't, because I am not my family. I am not cruel for cruelty's sake. I don't rule through fear alone." She stopped in front of Dominic, who had collapsed to his knees now, one hand still pressed to his chest as his wolf died inside him. Tears streamed down his face, blood dripped from his nose and ears, the physical manifestation of his internal destruction. In a matter of minutes, he'd gone from the most powerful alpha in North America to this broken, bleeding thing. "However," Maeve said, and her voice dropped to something soft and deadly, "I am also not weak, and I do not forgive." She leaned down, close enough that only he could hear her next words, close enough that her breath ghosted across his ear. The bond between them, or what remained of it, gave one final, agonized twist. "You could have had everything. A mate who would have loved you despite every logical reason not to. A queen who would have made you stronger than you ever dreamed possible. Power beyond your wildest ambitions. A partnership that would have reshaped the wolf world. His hands were shaking, his whole body was shaking. The reality of what he'd thrown away was finally hitting him far too late. But you chose status over destiny, politics over power, the approval of these simpering fools over a bond that was meant to shake the foundations of the world. Tears were running down his face now, mixing with the blood. Maeve felt nothing. The part of her that had loved him, that small, desperate piece that had hoped he might see her worth, had died the moment he'd spoken the rejection. What remained was cold and calculating and utterly without mercy. "So here's what's going to happen," she whispered. "You're going to live. You're going to wake up tomorrow in a world where you're still king, still powerful, still feared. But you will never shift again. You will never feel your wolf. You will never run under the moon or hunt in the forest or feel the joy of the change. You will spend the rest of your life as half of what you were. And every single day, every single moment, you will remember that you did this to yourself." She straightened, turned to face the crowd. 300 pairs of eyes stared back at her, wide with terror. "As for the rest of you, I'm giving you a choice. Bend the knee now, accept me as your rightful queen, and I will be merciful. I will guide you into a new era where power is earned, not inherited, where strength is measured by more than bloodlines and politics." The silver in her eyes intensified until it was painful to look at directly. "Or refuse. Challenge me. Try to kill me like your ancestors killed my family, and I will show you exactly why it took an army of 3,000 wolves and a century of planning to bring down the Sterling bloodline the first time." Silence. Dead, terrified silence. And then, slowly, starting from the back of the hall and rippling forward like a wave, wolves began to kneel. Not just kneel. They prostrated themselves completely, faces pressed to the cracked marble, throats exposed in the ultimate gesture of submission. They bent their necks and showed their bellies because every instinct in their bodies told them that resistance meant death, because they could feel the power radiating off this girl, this woman, this thing that looked human but carried the weight of something far older and infinitely more dangerous. The sound of hundreds of bodies pressing against stone echoed through the hall. Some were muttering prayers, others were weeping. All of them were utterly, completely broken. Within 5 minutes, every wolf in the grand hall was on their knees except 3. Dominic, broken and weeping on the platform, his wolf dying slowly inside him. Lady Serena, still standing with stupid, stubborn pride, her face pale but her chin raised in defiance, and a man Maeve had never noticed before, standing near the side entrance with his hand on his sword and his gray eyes locked on hers, tall, broad-shouldered. His face was a map of old scars, a thick one that ran from his left temple to his jaw, another across his throat that should have killed him. His hair was dark with threads of premature silver, cut military short. He wore plain black without insignia or decoration, but he carried himself like a warrior, like someone who'd seen 100 battlefields and walked away from all of them. His scent carried snow and steel and old battlefields, pine forests in winter, the sharp clarity of a blade fresh from the whetstone. And beneath her breastbone, in the space where her bond to Dominic had been dying, something new snapped into place. A second bond, stronger than the first, burning bright and clean and absolutely right in a way the first one never had. It hit her like lightning, like falling from a great height, like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. The rightness of it was overwhelming. The man's eyes widened, his hand fell away from his sword. He felt it too, the golden thread spinning out between them, binding soul to soul in a way that couldn't be denied or rejected or broken. "Well," Maeve said softly, "this is unexpected." Her second chance mate. Her true mate, if she believed in such things. Standing there in the ruins of her first rejection, with his scars and his sword and his steady gray eyes that held no fear. Only curiosity and something that might have been respect. She would deal with that later. Right now, she had a kingdom to claim and traitors to handle. "Serena Ashford," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the hall. "Do you yield?" Serena's lip curled. Even now, even with the evidence of Maeve's power literally cracking the building around them, she couldn't let go of her pride. "To you? A kitchen rat pretending to be royalty? Never. You're a fraud, a liar wearing a dead family's name. And when the other packs hear about this, when the High Council convenes, they'll—" Maeve moved. 1 second she was standing 20 feet away. The next she was in front of Serena, Her hand wrapped around the woman's throat, lifting her clear off the ground. The speed was inhuman. Impossible. Several nobles gasped. I am the last daughter of the line that ruled when your ancestors were still eating raw meat and sleeping in caves, Maeve said conversationally, as if she were discussing the weather and not slowly choking the life out of someone. I am power personified. I am the nightmare your bloodline tried to bury. And you, Lady Serena Ashford, are nothing but a spoiled child playing at politics. She squeezed. Not enough to kill. Just enough to make breathing very, very difficult. Serena's face was turning red, then purple. Her hands clawed uselessly at Maeve's arm, her perfectly manicured nails breaking against skin that felt like iron. You want to know why I scrubbed your floors? Why I served your tea? Why I let you treat me like dirt for years? Maeve's voice was still pleasant, still casual. Because I was waiting, watching, learning exactly who you all were, what you valued, what you feared. I was gathering information for the day when I would take everything from you. Serena's eyes were bulging now. Her struggles were getting weaker. So I'll ask you one more time, Lady Serena, and I suggest you think very carefully about your answer. Do you yield? Serena's face had gone from purple to gray. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. Finally, desperately, she managed a jerky nod. Maeve dropped her. Serena collapsed in a heap, gasping and sobbing, her hands clawing at her bruised throat. The sound of her desperate breathing was loud in the silent hall. Good, Maeve said. She looked down at the pathetic figure at her feet without a trace of sympathy. Let me be clear about what happens next. I am taking the silver throne. Not because I want it. Believe me, there are about 1,000 things I'd rather do than rule over you ungrateful parasites. But because it's mine by right, by blood, and by power that none of you can even comprehend. She turned to survey the hall full of kneeling wolves. Some had their eyes squeezed shut, too terrified to look at her. Others stared with the blank expression of people in shock. A few of the younger ones were still crying. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me personally. Form an orderly line. I'll be happy to discuss your concerns individually. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence was absolute. I will be a fair queen, Maeve continued, pacing slowly in front of the platform. Each step sent new cracks spiderwebbing across the marble. A just queen. I will hear grievances and settle disputes according to law. I will protect the weak and punish the wicked. I will build a kingdom where power is earned through merit, not accidents of birth. She let that sink in for a moment. But I will not be a kind one. Not to those who stood by and let my family be slaughtered. Not to those who built their fortunes on sterling land and sterling blood. Not to those who hunted my people like animals and thought they could erase us from history. Her eyes found Marcus Ashford in the crowd. He was on his knees with the rest, but his face was red with barely suppressed rage. His hands were clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white. She could see the calculations running behind his eyes. How to turn this. How to survive. How to eventually regain power. You will earn my mercy, Maeve said, speaking directly to him now. Or you will learn to fear me. Those are your only options. She looked at Dominic, still kneeling on the platform, his face a mask of agony. The bond between them was almost completely severed now. She could feel it, the last few threads fraying and snapping. In a few more minutes, it would be gone entirely, and he would be just another wolf, just another man, powerless and pathetic and alone. Starting with him. The hall held its collective breath. Dominic Blackwater, you are stripped of your title as Alpha King. You will retain your wealth and your lands. I'm not a monster, but you will no longer rule. You will live out your days as a cautionary tale about the dangers of rejecting what fate offers you. Dominic's head bowed. He didn't protest, couldn't protest. His wolf was too far gone to give him the strength for defiance. Maeve turned to Serena, who was still on the ground, one hand pressed to her bruised throat, tears streaming down her face and ruining her perfect makeup. And you, Lady Serena, since you wanted so desperately to be queen, to stand beside Dominic and rule the Northern Court, you can have a taste of what that life entails. Serena looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. Stupid girl. She still thought this might end in her favor. You will serve in this palace, in the kitchens, specifically, where you will learn exactly how much work goes into maintaining the lifestyle you've taken for granted your entire life. The hope died. Serena's face went from pale to white. You can't. I can, Maeve said simply. I'm the queen. I can do whatever I want. That's how power works, Lady Serena. I thought you understood that. She looked around at the sea of kneeling wolves, at the broken king and the humiliated lady, and the mysterious stranger with the new bond burning between them like a star. This ceremony is over, she announced. You are all dismissed. Return to your homes. Spread the word far and wide. Call every pack from the Arctic to the Gulf. Tell them the Sterling bloodline has returned. Tell them the age of pretenders is finished. Tell them a new queen has risen, and she remembers exactly what was done to her family. She started toward the exit, and the crowd parted before her like she carried plague. Wolves scrambled over each other to get out of her way, pressing themselves against the walls, some even climbing onto the damaged platform to avoid being in her path. At the door, she paused, looked back at the man with gray eyes. Her second chance mate, apparently, because fate had a sick sense of humor and excellent timing. You, she said. What's your name? He straightened from his bow. He'd been kneeling with the rest, she realized, showing respect without fear. His movements were economical, military precise. When he met her eyes, there was no terror in them, only curiosity and something that might have been respect in the same bone-deep recognition she felt singing through the new bond. Alistair Kane, my lady, General of the Eastern Guard. His voice was deep, rough-edged, the voice of someone who'd shouted orders across battlefields and whispered comfort to dying soldiers. A voice that had seen the worst of this world and survived it. Walk with me, General Kane, Maeve said. We have much to discuss. She saw him hesitate for just a fraction of a second, saw him glance at the devastation around them, the cracked marble, the broken king, the terrified nobles, making calculations, deciding if following her was wisdom or suicide. Then he nodded and fell into step beside her. As she walked out of the grand hall with her head high and her power radiating off her skin in waves, as she left behind the ruins of Dominic's kingdom and Serena's ambitions and the comfortable lies these wolves had told themselves for 70 years, Maeve Sterling, last daughter of the Silver Throne, rejected mate turned sovereign queen, allowed herself one small private smile. She'd spent 23 years hiding, 23 years playing weak and broken and small, 23 years waiting for exactly the right moment to reveal what she really was. Now it was time to reign. Ited. Behind her, in the wreckage of the Grand Hall, Dominic Blackwater felt the last thread of the mate bond snap. His wolf died with a final whimpering cry that only he could hear, and in the sudden terrible silence that followed, surrounded by the ruins of everything he'd built, he finally understood what he'd lost. It was already too late. The corridors of the palace were silent except for the sound of their footsteps, hers light and steady, his heavier with the weight of armor and weapons. Maeve didn't look back to confirm Alistair Kane was following. She could feel him through the bond, a warm presence at her back that felt nothing like the aching wrongness Dominic's bond had carried. They passed servants pressed flat against the walls, eyes downcast, trembling. Word had already spread. The impossible had happened. A Sterling had returned. The kitchen girl was queen. Maeve stopped in front of the council chamber, a massive oak door carved with wolves in various stages of hunt and kill. She'd polished this door 100 times, had listened through it while the High Council made decisions that affected thousands of lives, had been invisible to every important person who'd walked through it. Not anymore. She pushed it open without knocking. The council chamber was exactly as she remembered. A long table of polished mahogany surrounded by high-backed chairs, walls lined with portraits of former kings, windows overlooking the northern forest. 5 men sat around that table, and they all jumped when she entered. Marcus Ashford was there, of course. He'd recovered from the Grand Hall faster than the others, his survival instincts overriding his shock. Beside him sat Gregory Chen, the pack's chief strategist, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a mind like a steel trap. Thomas Wolfe, master of arms, all muscle and scarred knuckles. James Rivera, the treasurer, always counting costs. And old Richard Sterling, no relation to her, despite the name, who'd served as advisor to 3 kings and thought his age made him untouchable. They stared at her like she was a ghost. "Gentlemen," Maeve said pleasantly, "I believe we have business to discuss." Marcus stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "You have no authority here. This council answers to the Alpha King, who no longer has a wolf, Maeve interrupted, which means, according to pack law, he no longer has a throne. Did you think I didn't know the rules? I've spent years listening to you lot debate them. She moved to the head of the table, to the chair that had belonged to Dominic, sat down like she owned it, because she did. You can't just, Gregory started. I can, Maeve said, and I did. Now you have a choice. Accept the new reality, or I'll find a council that will. Thomas Wolfe's hand moved toward his weapon. Alistair, still standing by the door, was faster. His sword cleared its sheath with a whisper of steel, the point aimed at Thomas's throat before the older man could blink. I wouldn't, Alistair said quietly. Maeve glanced back at her new mate, seeing him clearly for the first time. The bond hummed with approval. He moved like violence was a language he spoke fluently, like he'd spent his entire life learning to kill efficiently and without hesitation. The scars on his face weren't decorative. They were lessons written in scar tissue. General Kane, she said, you can lower your sword. Master Wolfe was just about to make a wise decision. Thomas's hand moved away from his weapon. Slowly. His face was red with suppressed rage, but he wasn't stupid enough to challenge someone who'd moved that fast. Thank you, Maeve said. Now, let's discuss how this is going to work. She leaned back in the chair, studying each of them in turn. You're going to stay on this council. All of you. Because despite being opportunistic parasites who sold out my family for power, you're also competent. You know how this kingdom runs. You have connections, resources, and I'm going to need all of that. Marcus's jaw tightened. If you think we'll just... I think you'll survive, Maeve said flatly. That's what people like you do best. You survived the Sterling Purge by switching sides. You survived 3 different Alpha Kings by making yourselves indispensable. You'll survive me the same way. She pulled a sheet of paper from the stack in front of her, meeting minutes from last week. She'd read these before, had found them in the trash when she'd emptied the bins. Now she skimmed them with open contempt. Here's what's changing. First, the servant classes. No more 16-hour days, no more beatings for minor infractions. Fair wages, actual days off. Revolutionary concepts, I know. The budget can't support, James began. The budget supports Lady Serena's shoe collection, Maeve snapped. It can support paying people who actually work. Second, pack law. We're revising the challenge system. Too many alphas using it to murder their way up the hierarchy. Third, the treaty with the Western packs. I've read it. It's garbage. We're renegotiating. Gregory leaned forward, his analytical mind already working the angles. The Western Alpha won't accept new terms without concessions. The Western Alpha will accept whatever I offer because his economy depends on our trade routes, Maeve said. And because I'm going to remind him that the Sterling bloodline once ruled his territory too. We can discuss whether he'd like that arrangement to resume. The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. These men had grown comfortable in a world where the Sterlings were dead, where that kind of absolute power was just a story to frighten children. Having it sitting at their table, wearing the face of a girl they'd ignored for years, was clearly causing some cognitive dissonance. You're insane, Richard said. His voice shook slightly. You think you can just waltz in here and remake the entire social order? The other packs will never accept this. They'll see you as a threat. I am a threat, Maeve said. That's the point. She stood, placing her palms flat on the table. The wood groaned under the pressure. Here's what you don't understand, what none of you understand. The world you built after you killed my family? It's broken, corrupt. The strong prey on the weak without consequence. Justice is whatever the richest wolf can afford, and you all profit from it, so you tell yourselves it's natural, necessary, the way things have to be. The cracks spreading through the grand hall marble were nothing compared to what was happening to the council table. Fissures appeared in the polished wood, racing along the grain. But it's not natural. It's a choice you made, and I'm making a different one. Marcus stood abruptly, his chair toppling backward. You self-righteous little bitch. You think you're better than us? Your family ruled through fear and blood magic. They enslaved entire packs, made wolves into puppets dancing on silver strings. That's why the rebellion happened. That's why everyone helped kill them. Maeve's eyes flashed silver. My family ruled for 10,000 years because they were strong enough to maintain order in a world of chaos. Yes, they were ruthless. Yes, they used every advantage they had. But under their rule, there were laws, structure, protection for those who couldn't protect themselves. She walked around the table toward Marcus, who held his ground through sheer stubbornness. What happened after they died? 70 years of constant warfare, territory disputes that killed thousands, packs fragmenting and reforming and tearing each other apart. It took Dominic's grandfather 3 decades and a river of blood to create even a semblance of the stability my family maintained through simple dominance. That's not, Marcus started. It's exactly what happened, Maeve said. I've read the histories. The real ones, not the propaganda you teach children. I know what you did, what you all did. She stopped in front of him, close enough to see the fear he was trying to hide beneath his anger. So here's what's going to happen, Marcus Ashford. You're going to sit back down. You're going to do your job. And you're going to remember that I am not my family. I don't need blood magic to make you obey. I just need to stop holding back. The dominance that rolled off her was suffocating. Marcus went to his knees, his body betraying him, his wolf forcing submission his pride couldn't prevent. The other council members followed, chairs scraping as they dropped. Only Alistair remained standing by the door, watching with those steady gray eyes. Get up, Maeve said after a moment. All of you. I don't want your submission. I want your competence. Give me that, and we'll get along fine. They rose slowly, Marcus's face purple with humiliation. Dismissed, Maeve said. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning. Come prepared with actual solutions instead of excuses. They fled. Even Marcus, for all his bluster, couldn't get out fast enough. When the door closed behind them, Maeve let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. The power that had been blazing through her settled back down to something manageable. The bond pulsed with concern. That was quite a performance, Alistair said. Maeve turned to face him properly. Her true mate. The bond between them was still new, still strange, but it felt right in a way nothing with Dominic ever had. Where Dominic's bond had been all sharp edges and wrongness, this one was smooth, comfortable, like finding a piece of herself she hadn't known was missing. You didn't kneel in the grand hall, she said, not because you couldn't, because you chose not to. Alistair sheathed his sword, the movement fluid and practiced. I knelt. You were looking at Dominic when I did. But you could have resisted. Maybe. He moved closer and his scent washed over her, winter pine and weapon oil and something uniquely him. Or maybe I just didn't see the point in fighting the inevitable. You felt it, Maeve said, not a question. The bond? Alistair's mouth quirked in something that might have been a smile. Hard to miss. Felt like getting hit by lightning. And you're not running. Where would I run to? He stopped a few feet away, giving her space. Respectful. You're my mate. That's not exactly something I can avoid. Maeve studied him, this scarred warrior who'd somehow become hers through fate's twisted sense of humor. I don't know anything about you. I'm General of the Eastern Guard, 32 years old, served under 3 Alpha Kings. Good with a sword, better with strategy. I take my coffee black and my reports detailed. He paused. And I've known what you were for about 6 months. Maeve's eyes narrowed. Explain. The Sterling bloodline has certain markers, Alistair said carefully, things you learn to recognize if you study pack history enough. The way you moved, even when you were trying to look weak. The way other wolves unconsciously avoided you, even the dominants. The fact that you survived 23 years in a palace full of people who should have either claimed you or killed you. You knew, Maeve said flatly, and you said nothing. What was I supposed to say? Excuse me, Your Majesty, but I think your kitchen servant is secretly the last heir to the throne your grandfather murdered. That would have gone well. Despite everything, Maeve felt a laugh bubble up. It died quickly. You could have exposed me. I could have, Alistair agreed, but I didn't see the point. You weren't hurting anyone, and honestly, I was curious what you were waiting for. The right moment, Maeve said. Was it? Right, I mean? She thought about Dominic's face as his wolf died, about Serena's terror, about 300 wolves forced to their knees by sheer power. I don't know, she admitted. Ask me in a week. The bond pulsed again, warm and steady. Alistair took another step closer. For what it's worth, he said quietly, what you said in there, about changing things? I think it's needed. The system is broken. Has been for a long time. Most of us just don't have the power to do anything about it. And now I do. Now you do, he confirmed. Question is, what are you going to do with it? Before Maeve could answer, the door burst open. A young messenger, barely out of his teens, stood panting in the doorway. His eyes were wide with fear. "Your Majesty," he gasped. "The Western Pacts. They're here." Maeve's blood went cold. "Here?" At the border, 3,000 wolves. Alpha Marcus Wolf is demanding an audience. The boy's voice cracked. "He says if the usurper Sterling doesn't surrender by dawn, he'll burn the palace to the ground." The council chamber went very quiet. "How long do we have?" Alistair's voice was calm, professional. A soldier assessing a threat. 4 hours until dawn, the messenger said. Maeve's mind raced. 3,000 wolves. Marcus Wolf commanded the largest pack outside the northern court, had been waiting for any sign of weakness to make his move. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Someone had contacted him, told him about her revelation, probably promised him the northern territories if he eliminated her. "Get me a map," she said, "and find out who sent word to the Western Pacts. I want a name." The messenger fled. Alistair was already moving toward the weapons cabinet, pulling down swords and assessing their quality. 3,000 is too many for a direct fight. Even with your power, you'll tire eventually. They'll overwhelm us through sheer numbers. "I'm not fighting them," Maeve said. He looked at her sharply. "Then what? I'm going to make them submit." "That's insane. You can't dominate 3,000 wolves simultaneously." "My family did it regularly," Maeve said. She was thinking fast, remembering fragments of stories her mother had told her when she was small, before the rebellion, before the blood. The Sterling Sovereign Command. It's a technique that uses the bloodline power to enforce submission across entire armies. "I've read about it," Alistair said slowly, "in the old texts. It was supposed to be a myth. It's not." Maeve could feel it inside her, dormant but present. The knowledge passed down through generations. "But I've never used it, never needed to. And if it doesn't work? Then 3,000 wolves kill us all, and everything I'm trying to build dies with me." She met his eyes. "But it will work. It has to." The bond thrummed with his concern, but also with trust. He believed her, or at least he believed she believed herself. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "Round up every fighter we have, position them on the walls, but tell them not to engage. I need them visible, but not threatening. Show of force without provocation." "That's barely 300 soldiers against their 3,000. "I know, but it will buy me time." She moved toward the door. "And send someone to wake Dominic." Alistair's eyebrows rose. "Why?" "Because he's going to stand beside me when I face Marcus Wolf. He's going to show every wolf watching that even the former Alpha King acknowledges my authority." She smiled without humor, whether he wants to or not. The next 3 hours passed in a blur of preparation. Maeve changed into armor that had belonged to her mother, silver plate that had been hidden in the palace vaults for 70 years, waiting. It fit perfectly, molding to her frame like it had been made yesterday. The metal hummed with power, residual magic from a bloodline that had worn it for millennia. Dominic was brought to her in chains. He looked terrible. His face was gray, his eyes dull and lifeless, without the amber glow of his wolf. The rejection had completed its work. He was broken in every way that mattered. "You're going to stand with me," Maeve told him, "on the walls, when I face Marcus Wolf." "Why would I help you?" His voice was hollow. "Because if Marcus takes this palace, he'll kill you, slowly. You're a symbol of the old regime. He can't leave you alive." She leaned closer. "Help me, and you live. Refuse, and you die with everyone else." "Maybe I'd prefer death." "Maybe," Maeve agreed. "But I don't think so. You're not that brave." She left him there and headed for the walls. Dawn was breaking over the eastern mountains when she finally saw them. 3,000 wolves spread across the northern plain like a dark tide. Even from a distance, she could smell them, rage and bloodlust and the bitter scent of wolves who'd traveled through the night looking for war. They'd brought torches, the flames creating a sea of fire that stretched to the horizon. At their head rode Marcus Wolf. He was everything the stories said, huge, scarred, radiating the kind of dominance that came from decades of violence. His wolf was massive, coal-black with eyes like burning amber. He sat on an armored horse, his sword already drawn, his army arrayed behind him in perfect military formation. This was a man who knew how to wage war. Maeve stepped up onto the battlements, her silver armor catching the first rays of dawn. Alistair stood on her right, armored and ready. Dominic was on her left. In chains, his presence exactly the political statement she needed. The two armies stared at each other across 500 yards of open ground. Marcus Wolf's voice carried easily, enhanced by his alpha power. Maeve Sterling, come down from those walls. Face judgment for the crimes of your bloodline. What crimes would those be? Maeve called back. 10,000 years of tyranny, slavery, blood magic that turned free wolves into mindless puppets. His voice dripped with righteous fury. Your family was a disease. We cut it out. If you're truly the last Sterling, then you're the last mistake we need to correct. The wolves behind him howled agreement. 3,000 voices raised in unison, the sound shaking the very stones beneath Maeve's feet. Interesting, Maeve said. Tell me, Marcus, who told you I'd revealed myself? Who sent you word that a Sterling had returned? Silence. Was it Marcus Ashford? Did he promise you the Northern Territories if you eliminated me? Or was it someone else on the council, hedging their bets? More silence. But she saw the slight shift in his posture. The confirmation. Doesn't matter, Marcus Wolf said. You're a threat to every free wolf in North America. Surrender now, and I'll make your death quick. No, Maeve said simply. Then we'll take that palace apart stone by stone and drag you out. You can try. 3,000 wolves began to advance. Maeve closed her eyes and reached deep inside herself, past the power she'd used in the Grand Hall, past the dominance she'd wielded against the council, down to the core of what she was. The Sterling bloodline. 10,000 years of power condensed into her veins. The sovereign command. She'd never used it, had only heard stories, but the knowledge was there. Encoded in her blood and bones, passed down through generations of rulers who'd commanded armies with nothing but will and voice. She opened her eyes. They blazed pure silver, so bright that wolves in the front ranks flinched and looked away. And then she spoke. Not loud, barely above a whisper, but her voice carried across the plain like thunder, bypassing ears and striking directly at the wolf soul inside every creature that heard it. Kneel. It was a command, an order, a compulsion that bypassed choice and went straight to the most primal part of every wolf's being, the part that recognized an alpha, that understood hierarchy, that knew beyond doubt when something stronger had spoken. The first rank dropped instantly. 200 wolves hit the ground like puppets with cut strings, their bodies forced down by power they couldn't resist. Then the second rank, the third, the fourth. The sovereign command rolled across Marcus Wolf's army like a wave of pure dominance, crushing resistance, demanding submission, offering no choice but obedience. Within 30 seconds, 3,000 wolves were on their knees, every single one except Marcus Wolf himself. He was still on his horse, still upright, but she could see the strain. Blood was dripping from his nose. His hands shook on his sword. His wolf was fighting the command with everything it had, and it was barely enough to keep him conscious. I am Maeve Sterling, she said, and her voice resonated with power that made the air shimmer. Last daughter of the Silver Throne, heir to 10,000 years of unbroken rule, and you, Marcus Wolf, have made a very serious mistake. She stepped forward, and the stone beneath her feet cracked. You came here to kill me, to eliminate the last Sterling and claim these territories for yourself. You brought 3,000 wolves to make war on a kingdom you thought was weak. Another step. The crack spread. But I'm not weak. And this is not a kingdom. It's an empire, my empire, built by my ancestors and maintained through power you can't even comprehend. Marcus was trying to speak, trying to call a retreat, but the sovereign command had locked his jaw, frozen his voice. Your army is mine now, Maeve said. Every wolf who came here to kill me belongs to me, body and soul. That's what the sovereign command does. It doesn't just force submission, it creates a bond, permanent, unbreakable. They're part of my pack now, whether they like it or not. The horror in Marcus's eyes was delicious. You can fight it, Maeve continued. You're strong enough, I think, alpha enough. If you pour everything you have into resistance, you might break free. Of course, that would leave you wolfless, like Dominic. And then what use would you be? She was right in front of him now, close enough to see every scar, every line of rage and fear etched into his face. Or you can submit. Bend the knee properly. Acknowledge me as your sovereign, and I'll release the command. You'll keep your wolf, your life, even your territory, as long as you rule it according to my laws. Marcus's sword fell from his shaking hands. Slowly, fighting it every inch of the way, he dismounted. His knees hit the ground. I yield, he forced out. Each word was agony. I acknowledge your authority. The sovereign command released all at once. 3,000 wolves gasped as the pressure lifted. Some were crying. Others looked dazed, confused. All of them could feel the new bond, subtle but present. A silver thread connecting them to the woman standing on the wall in armor that blazed with dawn light. Return to your territories, Maeve said. Tell every pack from here to the ocean what happened today. Tell them the Sterling bloodline has returned. Tell them a new age has begun. And tell them that any who wish to challenge me should bring more than 3,000 wolves. Marcus Wolf rose slowly. He looked at her with something that might have been grudging respect. You're not like them, he said quietly. The old Sterlings. You could have killed us all. I still might, Maeve said, if you give me reason. Remember that. He nodded once. Then he mounted his horse and turned to his army. We're leaving, he called out. Stand down. Return home. The withdrawal was orderly, military precise. Within an hour, the plain was empty except for trampled grass and the scent of 3,000 wolves who'd come for war and left as subjects. Maeve stood on the wall and watched them go. Beside her, Alistair let out a breath. That was the most terrifying thing I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot. It needed to be, Maeve said. Her voice was tired. The sovereign command had drained her more than she'd expected. Word will spread. The other packs will hear. Some will submit without fighting. Others will challenge me anyway. Let them come, Alistair said. His hand found hers. The bond pulsed warm and steady. You'll handle them. Dominic, still in chains, was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. What? Maeve asked. I was going to marry Serena, he said hoarsely. Form an alliance with the Ashfords, play politics, rule through compromise and careful negotiation. He laughed, and it sounded broken. And you just conquered 3,000 wolves before breakfast. Yes, Maeve said. I did. I'm an idiot. Yes, she agreed. You are. She turned away from the empty plain and headed back toward the palace. There was so much work to do. Laws to rewrite, territories to organize, a kingdom, an empire, to build from the ruins of the old world. But for now, she'd proven her point. The Sterling bloodline had returned. And this time, no rebellion would be strong enough to bring it down. And this time, no rebellion would be strong enough to bring it down. The words tasted like ash in Maeve's mouth 3 days later. She stood in what had been Dominic's private study, now hers, staring at reports that made her head pound. The silver armor sat in the corner, still stained with frost from the battle that wasn't a battle. 3 days since Marcus Wolf had knelt. 3 days since she'd bound 3,000 wolves to her will with the sovereign command. 3 days of slowly drowning. The bonds were killing her. Not quickly, nothing so merciful, but she could feel them, constant and demanding, like fishing hooks embedded in her soul. 3,000 silver threads stretching across hundreds of miles, each one pulling, draining, whispering with barely suppressed resentment. Every time one of the bound wolves felt anger or pain or fear, it echoed through the connection. 3,000 lives bleeding into hers, drop by drop. Her hand shook as she tried to pour tea. The cup clattered against the saucer. You need to sleep. Maeve didn't turn. She knew Alistair's voice, could feel him through their mate bond, the only connection that didn't hurt. I'm fine. You haven't slept in 2 days, I can feel it. He moved closer, his boots soft on the carpet. The bonds are tearing you apart. I said I'm fine. You're lying. His hand settled on her shoulder, warm and steady. Talk to me. Maeve finally turned to look at him. Her mate. This scarred warrior who'd somehow become the only steady thing in her new world. The bond between them pulsed with concern and something deeper, something she wasn't ready to name yet. The old Sterlings maintained thousands of these bonds, she said quietly. tens of thousands. How did they stand it? Maybe they didn't. Alistair's gray eyes held hers. Maybe that's why they became monsters. Before Maeve could respond, the door burst open. A young messenger stumbled in, his face white with panic. Your Majesty, the Northern Council has called an emergency session. They're demanding your presence immediately. Maeve's stomach dropped. On whose authority? Marcus Ashford's. The boy swallowed hard. He says it's urgent. Life or death? Of course it was. The council chamber was packed when they arrived. Not just the 5 original members, but representatives from every major pack in the Northern Territories. Easily 40 wolves crammed into a space meant for 15. The air was thick with tension and barely suppressed aggression. Marcus Ashford stood at the head of the table like he owned it. Serena was there too, standing behind her father's chair with a silk scarf wrapped around her throat to hide the bruises. Her eyes found Maeve's and held murder in them. Your Majesty, Marcus said, and the title dripped with mockery. So kind of you to join us. Get to the point, Ashford. Maeve's voice came out harder than she felt. I have actual work to do. Work? Marcus smiled without warmth. Is that what you call it? Because what we call it is tyranny. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Maeve felt Alistair tense beside her, his hand moving toward his sword. Tyranny, Maeve repeated flatly. Interesting word coming from you. You bound 3,000 wolves against their will, Gregory Chen said. He sat near Marcus, his wire-rimmed glasses reflecting the lamplight. Created forced pack bonds without consent. Do you understand what that means? What you've done? I stopped a war, Maeve said. You enslaved free wolves. This from Thomas Wolfe, the master of arms. His scarred hands were clenched on the table. The sovereign command isn't protection, it's a leash. And now every pack on this continent knows you're willing to use it. They knew what the Sterling bloodline was capable of, Maeve said. That's why they tried to exterminate us. And they were right to try, Serena spat. Her voice was still hoarse from the damage Maeve had done to her throat. Your family ruled through blood magic and terror. You're proving that nothing's changed. Maeve's power flared before she could stop it. Silver light danced across her skin, and every wolf in the room flinched back. The bonds pulled harder, feeding on her anger, draining her faster. Careful, Lady Serena, Maeve said softly. I'm in a very bad mood. Threatening members of the council now? Marcus's voice carried satisfaction. How very sterling of you. He pulled a stack of papers from inside his jacket, spreading them across the table. Reports, letters, documents stamped with official seals. In the 3 days since you took the throne, 17 packs have withdrawn their trade agreements with the Northern Territories. 9 have closed their borders entirely. And the Eastern Coalition, every pack from the mountains to the coast, has formally declared you a threat to wolf sovereignty. Maeve's blood went cold. The Eastern Coalition? Alpha Rebecca Frost is leading them, Gregory said quietly. He pushed his glasses up his nose, his analytical mind already working the angles. She's demanding you release Marcus Wolfe's wolves from the Sovereign Command. If you refuse, she's declared blood feud. The room went silent. Rebecca Frost. Maeve knew the name. Everyone did. She was ancient, over 90 years old, and absolutely ruthless. Had held the Eastern Territories through 3 major wars and countless smaller conflicts. Had a reputation for being unkillable and utterly without mercy. How many wolves does she command? Alistair's voice was calm, professional. A soldier assessing a threat. 7,000, Marcus said. He was trying to hide his satisfaction and failing. Maybe more. They're gathering at Iron Ridge as we speak. 7,000. Combined with Marcus Wolfe's 3,000, if he decided to join them, that was 10,000 wolves. And Maeve could barely stand upright with the bonds she already carried. This is your doing, Maeve said. She looked at Marcus Ashford, at the calculation in his eyes. You contacted them, told them about the Sovereign Command, probably promised them I'd be an easy target if they moved fast. Marcus's face gave nothing away, but Serena flinched, just for a second, but it was enough. Who contacted them doesn't matter, Marcus said smoothly. What matters is they're coming. 7,000 wolves who want you dead, and you can't stop them. Can't I? Maeve's voice dropped to something dangerous. Kill them, and you start a war that never ends, Gregory said. Every pack will see you as a threat that needs to be eliminated. They'll unite against you. And if I try to bind them all with the sovereign command? Maeve already knew the answer, but she wanted to hear him say it. You'll burn yourself out, Gregory said bluntly. The Sterling records are clear. Even the strongest sovereigns could only maintain around 5,000 simultaneous bonds. You're already at 3,000, and you can barely function. Add 7,000 more and you'll tear yourself apart. So what do you suggest? Maeve's hands were shaking again. She clasped them behind her back to hide it. Surrender? Give up everything I've built because I'm too weak to hold it? Release the bonds, Alistair said quietly. Let Marcus Wolf's wolves go. Show Rebecca Frost you're willing to negotiate in good faith. Absolutely not. The words came out sharp. The second I release them, I look weak. Every pack on the continent will see it as proof the sovereign command can be resisted. They'll all come for me. They're already coming, Alistair said, 7,000 strong. The bond between them pulsed with frustration. He thought she was being stubborn. She thought he didn't understand what was at stake. What weakness meant when you'd spent your whole life being crushed under other people's boots. There is another option, Gregory said slowly. All eyes turned to him. The old texts mention it. The Sterling Conclave, a gathering of all pack leaders under sacred truce, binding negotiations enforced by ancient magic. That's a myth, Richard Sterling said from his seat at the far end of the table. So was the sovereign command until 3 days ago, Gregory shot back. The conclave was how major disputes were settled during the Sterling reign. Each side presents their case. Terms are negotiated. Whatever agreement is reached becomes magically binding. No one can break it without dying. Maeve felt a flicker of hope cut through the exhaustion. How does it work? You issue a formal challenge. Call for conclave on neutral ground. Rebecca Frost has to accept. Pack law requires it when challenged by a bloodline sovereign. You meet with witnesses from every major pack. You negotiate. If you reach an agreement, the ancient magic seals it. If you can't agree, trial by combat, Thomas Wolfe finished. His voice was grim. Single combat between pack leaders. Winner takes all. Loser dies. And their people are bound by whatever terms the victor sets. I can fight, Maeve said. Thomas laughed. It wasn't a kind sound. Rebecca Frost has killed 23 challengers in single combat. 23. She's been fighting for 70 years. You've been queen for 3 days. I have the Sterling power, which is currently being drained by 3,000 bonds you can't afford to release, Alistair interrupted. His voice was harder now. Thomas is right. You're exhausted. I can feel it through our bond. You can barely stand, let alone fight someone like Rebecca Frost. Then what do you want me to do? Maeve's voice rose. Let her march on the palace, surrender, crawl back to the kitchens where I belong? I want you to think strategically instead of emotionally, Alistair said. You're making decisions based on fear, not logic. I am not. You are. He stepped closer, his gray eyes holding hers. You're terrified. Terrified that if you show any weakness, any mercy, they'll destroy you the way they destroyed your family. So you're holding on to every scrap of power you can grab, even when it's killing you. The words hit like a physical blow. Maeve wanted to argue, to deny it, but the truth sat heavy in her chest. Your Majesty, Marcus said, and his voice carried false sympathy. Perhaps you should take some time to consider your options. Rest, recover your strength. We can reconvene tomorrow. Call the conclave, Maeve said. She didn't look at Alistair. Couldn't. Send word to Rebecca Frost, formal challenge. Neutral ground, 1 week from today. Your Majesty, I really think you should... Gregory started. That's my decision. Maeve turned toward the door. This meeting is over. She made it halfway to her chambers before her legs gave out. The world tilted. The bonds pulled and pulled and pulled, 1,000 hooks tearing at her soul. Maeve caught herself against the stone wall, breathing hard, silver light flickering across her skin in distress. Alistair was there immediately, his arms around her, holding her upright. I've got you, he said quietly. I'm fine. You passed out standing up. You're not fine. He guided her the rest of the way to her chambers, eased her onto the bed. Maeve's head was spinning. When had she last eaten? Slept? The days had blurred together into one long stretch of crisis and councils and the constant grinding pressure of the bonds. The bonds, she said. Her voice sounded distant. They're getting heavier. Then release them. I can't. Why not? Alistair sat beside her, his hand finding hers. The mate bond pulsed warm and steady between them, the only thing that didn't hurt. Talk to me. Really talk to me. Why is this so important? Maeve closed her eyes. Because my whole life I've been nothing. The orphan, the servant, the omega everyone looked through like I didn't exist. And now I finally have power, real power. And you want me to just let it go? I want you to survive, Alistair said. There's a difference between being strong and being self-destructive. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. His voice was gentle but firm. You're not doing this to protect the kingdom. You're doing this to protect yourself, to prove you're not weak, not worthless, not the girl who scrubbed floors while noble wolves spit on her. The truth of it burned. You stood on those walls and bound 3,000 souls because you could, Alistair continued, not because you had to, because it felt good to make them kneel, to prove you were stronger, to finally be the one with all the power. Stop. Maeve's voice cracked. I'm trying to save your life, Alistair said, because in a week you're going to face Rebecca Frost in single combat, and if you keep draining yourself like this, she's going to kill you, and I can't— His voice broke. I can't lose you, not when I just found you. Maeve opened her eyes, looked at this scarred warrior who'd somehow become her anchor in the storm. I'm scared, she whispered, all the time. Scared that if I show weakness, they'll take everything. Scared that I'm becoming the monster they already think I am. Scared that maybe they're right to be afraid of me. Then prove them wrong, Alistair said. Be better than your family. Be the queen who chose mercy over vengeance, strength over cruelty. And if that gets me killed, then at least you'll die as yourself instead of as their nightmare. The week passed too quickly. Maeve tried to rest, to recover her strength, but the bonds made sleep nearly impossible. Every night was filled with fractured dreams. 3,000 voices whispering resentment, anger, hatred. She'd wake gasping, silver light flickering across her skin, feeling like she was being torn apart from the inside. Gregory researched the conclave protocols, digging through texts so old they crumbled at the touch. The rules were clear: neutral ground, witnessed by representatives from every major pack, binding negotiations enforced by magic older than written language. If they couldn't reach agreement, single combat decided everything. Winner lived, loser died. And the winner's terms became absolute law, enforced by the same ancient magic that powered the conclave itself. Alistair trained her when she had the energy. Basic combat forms, fighting strategies, ways to compensate for the exhaustion that dogged her every move. But they both knew it wouldn't be enough. Rebecca Frost had 70 years of experience. Maeve had 3 days as queen and a body that was slowly eating itself. On the 5th day, Serena came to her chambers. Maeve was alone, staring at maps of the Eastern Territories, trying to plan for a future she probably wouldn't live to see. She didn't hear Serena enter. The bonds were screaming too loud, but she felt the shift in the air. If you're here to gloat, save it, Maeve said without looking up. I'm not here to gloat. Serena's voice was different, quieter. I'm here to warn you. That got Maeve's attention. She turned to find Serena standing in the doorway, still in servant's clothes, still wearing that silk scarf. But her eyes held something new, something that looked almost like guilt. Warn me about what? Serena closed the door behind her, moved closer. My father didn't just contact Rebecca Frost. He made a deal with her. If she kills you at the conclave, he gets to choose who takes the Northern throne. He's planning to put Dominic back in power and force him to marry me. Maeve's blood went cold. Why are you telling me this? Because you executed David Chen for treason my father committed. Serena's hands clenched at her sides. An innocent man died while my father walks free. And I stayed silent because I was angry at you, because I wanted you to fail. And now? Now I've spent a week scrubbing floors and emptying chamber pots and being treated like I'm invisible. Serena's voice was raw. And I understand what it was like for you, what we did to you. And I'm ashamed. Maeve studied her, looking for the lie, the trap. But all she saw was a girl who'd had everything and lost it, and was trying to figure out who she was without the armor of privilege. What does your father get out of this? Maeve asked. Rebecca Frost has promised him trade monopolies with the Eastern Territories, exclusive rights worth millions, and a seat on her council when she expands westward. Serena swallowed hard. He's betting everything on you losing. He's going to be disappointed then. Is he? Serena's eyes met hers. Because you look half dead already, and the fight hasn't even started. Maeve wanted to argue. Couldn't. Because Serena was right. She could see it in the mirror every morning, the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hands shook, the silver light that flickered across her skin like a failing lamp. I don't have a choice, Maeve said. If I release the bonds, I look weak. If I keep them, they kill me slowly. Either way, Rebecca wins. There's always a choice, Serena said. You just don't like any of them. After she left, Maeve stood alone in her chambers and faced the truth she'd been avoiding. She was going to lose. The conclave ground was a circle of ancient stones in the mountains between northern and eastern territories. Sacred ground, neutral ground, where pack law had been settled for thousands of years before the Sterling line fell. The stones themselves were carved with runes so old their meaning had been lost to time, but the power in them was unmistakable. The air hummed with it. 7,000 eastern wolves waited on one side of the circle. 300 northern wolves stood on the other. The numbers were obscene, horrifying. Maeve walked through her people toward the center, and she could feel their fear, smell it. They knew this was suicide, knew she was going to die. But pack law required them to witness. Alistair walked beside her, armed and armored, his face carefully blank, but the mate bond sang with anguish. It's not too late, he said quietly. Surrender. Negotiate. Live. And then what? Crawl back to the kitchens? Pretend the last week didn't happen? Then build something new, something better, just not like this. Maeve touched his scarred face. If I die, don't. If I die, she continued, make sure someone remembers that I tried, that I wanted to change things, that I wasn't just another tyrant. You're not dying today, Alistair said fiercely. I won't let you. But they both knew he couldn't stop it. Rebecca Frost stood in the center of the circle, and she was everything the stories promised. Ancient, scarred, radiating power that came from surviving 9 decades of constant warfare. Her hair was white as snow, her face weathered like old leather, her eyes sharp as broken glass. She wore simple leather armor, no ornamentation, no decoration. A warrior who had nothing left to prove. Maeve walked forward to meet her, and the difference was stark. Youth versus age. Desperation versus experience. A girl who'd been queen for a week versus a woman who'd ruled for 70 years. So, you're the last Sterling, Rebecca said. Her voice was rough, like gravel scraping stone. Smaller than I expected. I get that a lot, Maeve said. Rebecca smiled. It wasn't kind. I'm going to kill you, girl. Nothing personal, but the world doesn't need another Sterling sovereign. The conclave requires negotiation first, Maeve said. State your terms. Simple. Rebecca's eyes glittered. Release every wolf you've bound with the sovereign command. Swear blood oath never to use it again. Limit your rule to the northern territories. No expansion, no conquest. Pay reparations to Marcus Wolf's packs for violating their free will, and abdicate within the year to a ruler chosen by Democratic Council. That's not negotiation, Maeve said. That's unconditional surrender. Yes, Rebecca agreed. It is. Counteroffer. You acknowledge my authority as Sterling sovereign. Agree to send representatives to a reformed High Council where all packs have equal voice. And I'll establish laws limiting the use of the sovereign command to defensive situations only. Not enough. It's more than you'd get from any other ruler. I'd get more from your corpse, Rebecca said pleasantly, which is what I'll have when this is over. The runes on the stones began to glow. Ancient magic waking, preparing to bind whatever agreement they reached, or to sanction single combat if they couldn't agree. Maeve felt the weight of 7,000 eyes watching, waiting. 300 of her own people who'd followed her here to watch her die. She thought about releasing the bonds. Right now, right here. Showing Rebecca she could be merciful. But the thought made her stomach turn, because Alistair was right. She wasn't holding on to the bonds for strategic reasons. She was holding on to them because they were hers, because they proved she was strong, because letting go felt like admitting she was the weak, worthless Omega everyone had always said she was. I refuse your terms, Maeve said. Rebecca's smile widened. Trial by combat it is. The crowd erupted. 7,000 eastern wolves roaring approval. 300 northern wolves standing silent as graves. When I win, Maeve said, every wolf here acknowledges my sovereignty. No more challenges, no more rebellions. This ends today. Bold, Rebecca said. And when I win, the Sterling line dies with you, and the world moves on without your family's poison. The runes flared bright, sealing the terms, binding them in magic that couldn't be broken. They had 1 hour to prepare. Maeve walked back to her side of the circle. Alistair was waiting with water and weapons, his face carved from stone. Last chance to reconsider, he said. Can't. Terms are sealed. Then at least release the bonds. Give yourself a fighting chance. Maeve looked at him, at this man who'd become everything to her in just a week, who loved her despite seeing exactly what she was becoming. I can't, she whispered. I know I should. I know it's killing me, but I can't let go. Alistair's jaw tightened. Then you're going to die. I know. He grabbed her shoulders, forced her to meet his eyes. I love you. I need you to know that. I've loved you since I figured out what you were, since before the mate bond snapped into place, and watching you do this is destroying me. The words should have filled her with warmth. Instead, they just made everything hurt worse. I'm sorry, Maeve said. Don't be sorry. Just win. The hour passed. Maeve walked back to the center of the circle. Rebecca was already there, stripping off her outer layers to reveal a body that was all scars and ropey muscle. 70 years of warfare written on her skin in scar tissue and old wounds. They faced each other as the runes flared to life, creating a dome of shimmering magic around them. Inside the dome, 2 wolves would fight. Only one would leave alive. Last chance to yield, Rebecca said. Go to hell, Maeve replied. Rebecca's wolf erupted from her skin in a shower of silver light and ancient power. Massive, white-furred, with eyes that glowed like stars. A creature of nightmares and legend. 70 years of kills and victories and survival made manifest. Maeve reached for her own wolf and felt nothing. The bonds. They were draining her so completely she couldn't shift, couldn't access her wolf form, couldn't tap into the power that had let her dominate Marcus Wolf's army. The 3,000 connections were like chains, holding her in human form, bleeding her dry. Panic hit like ice water down her spine. Rebecca saw it. Saw the exact moment Maeve realized she was fighting in human form against a wolf that had killed 23 challengers. The old woman's laugh echoed inside the dome, wild and delighted. You fool, Rebecca said, her wolf's voice a growl of satisfaction. You absolute fool. And then she attacked, and Maeve knew with absolute certainty that she was going to die. Rebecca's massive white wolf moved like lightning, impossibly fast for something so large. 70 years of killing experience compressed into pure predatory grace, jaws wide, teeth like daggers, aiming straight for Maeve's exposed throat. A kill strike. Clean, efficient, final. Maeve threw herself sideways, her exhausted body responding a half-second too slow. Pain exploded across her shoulder as teeth tore through flesh and muscle, ripping deep. She hit the ground hard, her head cracking against stone, rolled desperately, came up bleeding and gasping. The bond screamed in her head, 3,000 voices reacting to her pain, their panic feeding back into her like an echo chamber of terror. The drain intensified. Every drop of strength her body tried to summon for healing got siphoned away, divided among thousands of connections, leaving her weak and human and dying. Rebecca circled, Maeve's blood dripping from her muzzle. Her white fur was pristine except for that splash of red. She looked patient, amused even. Why rush when the outcome was already decided? You can't even shift, the old wolf's voice rumbled, half-human speech forced through an animal throat, distorted but understandable. Bound yourself so tight to those 3,000 slaves that you've crippled yourself. What did you think would happen? That your precious bloodline would save you? Maeve pressed her hand to her shoulder, trying to slow the bleeding. Her fingers came away slick and red. Too much blood. The wound should have been healing already. Sterling wolves healed fast, it was in their nature, but the bonds were drinking up every scrap of power her body produced. I thought I was strong enough, Maeve said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt, which was something. I was wrong. Rebecca laughed, the sound harsh and wild. At least you're honest. Most Sterlings died still believing they were gods among wolves, still convinced their power made them untouchable. She lunged again without warning. Maeve dodged, but barely, her injured shoulder screaming protest, her legs shaking with exhaustion. Claws raked across her ribs, opening 3 parallel gashes that burned like fire. The pain was extraordinary. The bonds pulled harder, feeding on it, creating a vicious cycle that made it nearly impossible to think. Outside the shimmering dome of conclave magic, 7,000 eastern wolves were howling. A sound of triumph, of victory already won. They could see what Maeve could feel. This fight was over. It had been over before it started. Maeve backed towards the edge of the magical barrier, her blood leaving a trail across the ancient stones. Each breath hurt. Each step was agony. Rebecca stalked after her, taking her time now, savoring this. The great white wolf had waited 70 years to kill the last Sterling. She was going to enjoy it. Your family ruled through fear, Rebecca said conversationally, as if they weren't in a fight to the death, as if Maeve wasn't bleeding out right in front of her. Through the sovereign command and blood magic and absolute dominance. They made free wolves into slaves, into puppets dancing on silver strings. Do you know what that was like? Feeling those chains in your mind every moment of every day? Knowing that your thoughts, your choices, your very will could be overridden by someone who thought they were better than you. No, Maeve admitted. She pressed harder against her ribs, trying to keep pressure on the wounds. The stones behind her were slick with her own blood. I don't know. I never lived under their rule. Then let me show you what it feels like to be helpless. Rebecca attacked again, and this time Maeve had nowhere to go. Massive jaws closed around her leg just above the knee, bone-crushing pressure that made her scream. And then the old wolf was shaking her head violently, whipping Maeve around like a child's toy. Something broke with a wet, terrible crack. Maeve's scream cut off as the world spun sickeningly. She hit the ground and couldn't get up. Couldn't even move her leg, just lay there gasping, drowning in pain. The bonds were shrieking now. 3,000 wolves feeling her agony through the forced connections, their panic and horror feeding back into her in waves, creating a feedback loop of suffering that threatened to tear her mind apart. She could feel them. Marcus Wolf's warriors, scared and angry and desperate, pulling at the silver threads that bound them to her, trying to help and only making it worse. Rebecca stood over her, blood and saliva dripping from her muzzle onto Maeve's face. The old wolf's eyes were cold, satisfied. This was justice, those eyes said. This was what happened to tyrants. Any last words, little Sterling? Maeve looked past the massive wolf looming over her, through the shimmering dome of conclave magic to where Alistair stood with their 300 northern wolves, his scarred face carved from pure agony. She could feel him through their mate bond, the only connection that didn't hurt, the only thing in her entire existence right now that felt clean and right. He was screaming at her through the bond, begging her to get up, to fight, to not leave him alone in this world. Beyond him, she could see Marcus Ashford in the crowd, smiling, already counting his profits, already planning how he'd spin this disaster to his advantage. Probably had the speech prepared. Tragic young queen, too inexperienced, bit off more than she could chew. Now let's get back to how things were. And further back, half hidden in the crowd of northern wolves, Maeve saw Serena, no longer smiling, just watching with an expression Maeve couldn't read. Complicated. Conflicted. Maeve thought about her mother, about fragments of memories from before the rebellion, a woman with silver eyes teaching her daughter how to be strong, how to survive, how to hide what she was when the world turned against them. Her mother had died believing the Sterling line would rise again, had died protecting Maeve so she could live to reclaim their throne. And here Maeve was, dying in the same place her family had ruled from for 10,000 years, proving that maybe the world had been right to tear them down. In that moment, staring up at death, feeling 3,000 bonds pulling her apart, tasting her own blood, something clicked in Maeve's mind. She'd been fighting the wrong battle. You're right, she said. Blood filled her mouth, but she forced the words out anyway, speaking clearly despite the agony. About everything. My family were monsters. The sovereign command is slavery. And I've been so terrified of being weak, so scared of being the powerless omega everyone could hurt, that I became exactly what they were. Rebecca's ears flicked forward. Confusion replaced certainty in those ancient eyes. But you're wrong about one thing, Maeve continued. She could feel it now, the bonds, all 3,000 of them, pulling and draining and desperate. Not trying to hurt her, trying to help, trying to give her strength because the Sovereign Command had made them Pack, and Pack didn't let Pack die. You think the Sovereign Command is just a leash, a way to control and dominate, but it's not. Not really. It's a connection, and connections work both ways. Rebecca's growl was a warning. What are you? Maeve stopped fighting the bonds. For a week, for every agonizing moment since she'd bound Marcus Wolf's army, she'd been trying to control the connections, trying to keep 3,000 wolves submissive and obedient while holding them at arm's length, keeping them separate from her true self. Maintaining the dominance, staying in control. Because if she lost control, if she let them in, she'd be vulnerable, weak. Everything she'd sworn she'd never be again. Now she opened the floodgates and let them in completely. 3,000 bonds that had been pulling at her, draining her, fighting against her iron grip. They suddenly reversed. She wasn't taking from them anymore. She was asking, not demanding submission or obedience or power, just asking if they'd help her, if they'd lend her their strength, if they'd choose to save her life. And 3,000 wolves, warriors who'd come to kill her, who'd been enslaved against their will, who had every reason to let her die, chose to say yes. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. Power flooded through the bonds like a dam breaking. Not the forced, stolen strength of the Sovereign Command as her family had used it. This was given freely, offered willingly. 3,000 wolves lending their energy, their healing, their life force to the queen who'd bound them, because she'd stopped treating them like slaves and started treating them like Pack. Silver light exploded from Maeve's skin, so bright that wolves outside the dome had to shield their eyes or look away. The conclave stones themselves began to glow in response, ancient magic recognizing what was happening. Her wounds began to heal, not slowly, not the struggling regeneration her body had been trying to manage, but in seconds. Bone knitting back together with audible cracks that made Rebecca step back in shock. Flesh closing, blood flow stopping. The terrible pain fading to nothing. Maeve stood up. Rebecca lunged for her throat, trying to end this before whatever was happening could finish, before this impossible reversal could complete itself. Maeve caught the massive wolf's jaws in her bare hands and held them shut. The strength flowing through her was incredible. Not her own. She'd been right about that. She was too drained, too damaged, had pushed herself too far. But borrowed. 3,000 wolves lending her their power through bonds that had transformed from chains into true Pack connections. She could feel them now. Not just the connections, but the wolves themselves. Marcus Wolf's warriors, still angry about being bound, but also curious about what she was doing, confused by this reversal. By being asked instead of forced. By being given a choice. And they were choosing her. The old Sterlings used the Sovereign Command wrong, Maeve said. Her voice resonated with harmonics that shouldn't exist in a human throat, layered with 3,000 voices speaking in unison, every wolf who'd lent her their strength. They treated it like a weapon, a chain, a way to dominate and control. But that's not what it was meant to be. It was meant to create real Pack bonds, real connection, real unity. She lifted Rebecca's massive white wolf form off the ground and threw her backward. The old wolf hit the magical barrier with enough force to make the entire dome shudder, bounced off in a shower of sparks, hit the ground hard. Maeve walked forward, and with each step the borrowed power blazed brighter. She could feel it burning through her. 3,000 wolves worth of strength and speed and healing, all channeled through her sterling bloodline, all offered freely instead of taken by force. The difference was staggering. This was what the Sovereign Command was supposed to be. Not slavery, partnership. But she could also feel the danger. This much power flowing through her mortal body could burn her out from the inside if she wasn't careful. She had minutes, maybe less, before the borrowed strength started tearing her apart instead of healing her. "I'm done fighting you," Maeve said. Rebecca shifted back to human form, her weathered face twisted in disbelief and fury. Blood ran from her nose where she'd hit the barrier. "You don't get to quit. Terms are sealed. We fight until one of us is dead." "No." Maeve shook her head. The silver light was already starting to fade as the borrowed strength flowed back to where it belonged. She was letting it go, releasing the power, giving it back to the 3,000 wolves who'd offered it. We fight until one of us yields. That's the actual law. That's what the conclave magic recognizes. Surrender, not just death. She let the power fade completely, let herself become just Maeve again, exhausted, injured, human, but healed enough to stand, healed enough to make this choice. I yield, Maeve said clearly, her voice carrying across the stone circle to every watching wolf. The magical dome shattered. The conclave magic fractured like glass struck by a hammer, the ancient runes on the standing stones flaring so bright they burned afterimages into every watching eye. The sound was like thunder, a crack of displaced power that rolled across the mountains and echoed back. 7,000 eastern wolves gasped as one. 300 northern wolves stood frozen in shock, unable to process what they'd just witnessed. Rebecca shifted back to human form completely, standing there bleeding and confused in the center of the stone circle. "What the hell are you doing?" "Ending this," Maeve said. The borrowed strength was completely gone now, flowing back through 3,000 bonds to the wolves who'd given it. She swayed on her feet, exhausted beyond measure, but she stayed upright through pure stubborn will. "You were right. I can't win this fight. Not like this. Not by being what my family was. Not by treating power as something to hoard and control." She turned to face the assembled packs, 7,000 eastern wolves on one side, 300 northern on the other, all staring at her like she'd lost her mind. Maybe she had. But if she was going to die anyway, and without the borrowed power, Rebecca could absolutely still kill her. She might as well die trying to fix what she'd broken. "I called this conclave to prove my strength," Maeve said. Her voice carried easily across the stone circle, enhanced by residual magic still crackling in the air like static. "To show everyone that the Sterling bloodline had returned and you should all fear me. To demonstrate that I had the power to make you submit whether you wanted to or not. But that's not what this world needs. That's not what any of us need." Marcus Ashford was pushing through the northern wolves, his face purple with rage. "You can't yield! The terms are sealed by conclave magic. If you yield, Rebecca gets everything she demanded. The northern territories, reparations, your abdication. I know what the terms were," Maeve cut him off, "and I'm changing them." "You can't change sealed terms. Watch me." She looked at Rebecca Frost, this ancient warrior who'd fought for 70 years to keep the Eastern Territories free from tyranny, who'd killed 23 challengers in single combat, who'd come here expecting to end the Sterling line once and for all. "You said my family ruled through fear and blood magic," Maeve said. "You were absolutely right. They did. They were monsters who treated free wolves like property, and I've spent the last week proving I'm no better than they were. So here are my new terms." She reached for the 3,000 bonds, those silver connections to Marcus Wolf's warriors that had nearly killed her, that had drained her to the point of collapse, that represented everything wrong with how her family had ruled, and she simply let them go. The connection snapped like cut strings, 3,000 silver threads dissolving into nothing. 3,000 wolves gasped simultaneously as the weight they'd been carrying for a week suddenly lifted, as the chains in their minds just vanished. Freedom, real, genuine freedom. The kind they hadn't felt since Maeve had bound them on the battlefield. The shock rippled through both armies like a physical wave. Maeve staggered as the last connection severed, as the final drain on her power disappeared. Without the bonds, without the constant pull of 3,000 forced connections, she felt lighter. Weaker too. She'd never again be able to call on that surge of borrowed strength, but also free in a way she hadn't been since she'd first used the Sovereign Command. Alistair was there immediately, catching her before she could fall, his arms strong and steady around her. The mate bond pulsed with relief and terror, and something that might have been fierce pride. "What are you doing?" he whispered urgently. "Something different," Maeve said. "Something better." She looked at Rebecca, at Marcus Wolf, who'd pushed through the eastern crowd with wonder written across his scarred face, at the 7,000 wolves who'd come here expecting war. "I'm not my family," Maeve said, projecting her voice so everyone could hear. "I don't want to rule through force and fear and chains in people's minds. I want to build something better than that. A council of packs where every territory has an actual voice, not just the illusion of one. Laws that protect the weak instead of just empowering the strong. A world where Omegas don't have to scrub floors until their hands bleed and pray nobody notices them." She paused, gathering her strength. "A world where power comes from consent instead of domination." "That's a pretty speech," Rebecca said slowly. She was studying Maeve like a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. But you just gave up your only leverage. What's to stop me from killing you anyway and taking the Northern Territories? The terms were sealed. You yielded, which means I won, which means I get everything I demanded. Nothing, Maeve admitted. Except that I'm betting you're not actually the monster the stories say you are. I'm betting you fought my family because they were tyrants, not because you enjoy killing. I'm betting you want peace as much as I do. You're just smart enough to know it can't be built on slavery and fear. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Rebecca stared at her for a long moment. Her weathered face was unreadable, ancient eyes calculating odds and angles Maeve couldn't even guess at. Then she did something Maeve never expected. She laughed. Not the cruel, mocking laugh from earlier. This was genuine amusement, rusty from disuse, but real. You're either the bravest fool I've ever met, or the smartest. I genuinely can't decide which. Can I be both? Rebecca's smile widened, showing teeth. You released 3,000 wolves. Just like that. No hesitation. No negotiation. No demands for concessions first. She shook her head. I came here to kill the last Sterling, to end your bloodline once and for all, and make sure nothing like the old regime could ever rise again. But you're not what I expected. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know yet. Rebecca moved closer, limping slightly from where she'd hit the barrier. She studied Maeve with those sharp eyes that had seen 7 decades of warfare. Your family ruled for 10,000 years through absolute dominance, through making every other wolf in the world into extensions of their will. You're proposing democracy, equality, shared power. It goes against every instinct we have as wolves. We're pack animals. We need hierarchy. We need alphas who lead and others who follow. Maybe, Maeve said, or maybe that's just what we've been told because it benefits the people in charge. Maybe we're capable of more than that. Maybe. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant. Or maybe you're just naive enough to believe you can change 10,000 years of history with good intentions and radical ideas. Someone has to try, Maeve said, and I'd rather die trying to build something better than live by perpetuating something broken. Rebecca looked past her to the assembled wolves, at her 7,000 Eastern Pack members, watching this exchange with confusion and hope and fear all mixed together. At Marcus Wolf's warriors, still touching their necks where the silver bonds had been, like they couldn't quite believe they were really free. At the 300 northern wolves who'd followed Maeve here expecting to watch her triumph, and instead witnessed her surrender everything. If I support this, Rebecca said slowly, choosing each word with care, if I tell the Eastern Coalition to accept your authority and participate in this Grand Council you're proposing, half of them will call me a traitor to everything we fought for. The other half will think I've gone senile in my old age. And if you don't, then we go back to the old way. Territory disputes, border wars, endless fighting over scraps while we all pretend we're better than the Sterlings were. Rebecca's jaw tightened. I'm 93 years old, girl. I've fought more battles than you've lived days. I've killed more wolves than you've probably met. And I'm tired of it. So fucking tired of the fighting and the dying and the same stupid cycle repeating over and over. She turned to face her people, her back straight despite her age, her voice carrying clearly across the stone circle. The Eastern Coalition accepts the Sterling sovereignty, Rebecca announced. Not because we fear her, clearly she's too stupid to use the power she has, but because she's offering something we've never had in my lifetime. A real chance at lasting peace, a system where might doesn't automatically make right. And I'm old enough to want to see that before I die. The shock that rippled through the Eastern wolves was palpable. 7,000 voices rising in protest, argument, confusion. Their leader had just surrendered to a girl who'd yielded to her. It made no sense. It violated everything they understood about power and hierarchy and how the world worked. But Rebecca just stood there, unmovable as the mountains, waiting for them to accept it. Marcus Wolf stepped forward from the crowd. The Western Packs agree, he said, his rough voice carrying authority. We'll send representatives to this Grand Council. We'll participate in building these new laws. He looked at Maeve with something that might have been respect or might have been wonder. You freed us when you could have kept us enslaved. We won't forget that. One by one, pack leaders began to step forward. Eastern, Western, smaller territories Maeve had never even heard of. Acknowledging her authority, not through force or fear or magical compulsion, but through choice, through the radical idea that maybe, just maybe, she was offering them something worth trying. Marcus Ashford was screaming, his face apoplectic with rage. "This is insane! You're all insane! She's a Sterling! She'll betray you the first chance she gets!" This is what they do. They lull you into false security, and then they strike. "No," Serena's voice cut through her father's tirade like a knife. She pushed through the crowd, still wearing simple clothes instead of her usual finery, the bruises on her throat visible to everyone. "She won't, because she's not them." She stopped in front of Maeve, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Two women who'd been bitter enemies just weeks ago, who'd hurt each other deliberately and badly, who'd both been shaped by a system that pitted them against each other instead of letting them find common ground. "I was wrong about you," Serena said quietly, though her voice still carried to the nearby wolves. "I thought you were just another tyrant wearing a different face, another Sterling who'd say whatever she needed to say to grab power. But you're not. You're actually trying to fix what we broke." "I'm trying," Maeve agreed. "Doesn't mean I'll succeed." "Maybe not." Serena turned to face her father, and her voice hardened. "But I'm going to help her try. And if you try to stop us, Father, I'll testify about every deal you made behind the Council's back, every betrayal, every secret negotiation with foreign pacts, every life you traded for profit and power." Marcus Ashford's face went from purple to white. "You ungrateful little—" "I'm grateful," Serena interrupted. "For the first time in my privileged, wasteful life, I'm actually grateful. Because you taught me exactly what kind of person I don't want to be." The Northern Pack representatives were murmuring now, Marcus's former allies visibly backing away, distancing themselves from the conspiracy that was unraveling in real time. The smart ones knew which way the wind was blowing. Gregory Chen stepped forward, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses with characteristic precision. "The High Council recognizes Queen Maeve's authority," he said in his quiet, analytical voice. "And we will support the formation of the Grand Council she's proposing. It's time for a change. Past time, actually." "This is treason," Marcus snarled, looking around desperately for support that wasn't coming. "All of you, this is treason against everything we've built." "No," Gregory said calmly. "This is evolution. And if you can't adapt, you'll be left behind." The conclave ground erupted in discussion, packs arguing with each other and within themselves, trying to figure out what this meant for territories and trade and the thousand small details of actually governing. It was chaotic, messy, democratic in the rawest, most beautiful sense. Maeve felt Alistair's arms around her, holding her upright as the adrenaline finally drained away completely, and the injuries she'd sustained caught up with her. Her shoulder throbbed, her ribs ached. Her leg was still tender where Rebecca had broken it, even though the borrowed healing had fixed the bone. "You actually did it," Alistair said, his voice full of wonder and relief and love so intense it made the mate bond sing. "You changed the entire game." "I gave up everything," Maeve said. Her voice was getting weaker. The exhaustion was crushing now. "The bonds, the sovereign command, all the power that made them fear me. I've got nothing left." "You're wrong." Alistair turned her gently to face him, his gray eyes intense. "You gained something infinitely more valuable than fear. You gained their respect, their trust, their willing cooperation. You gave up the power to force them and gained the opportunity to actually lead them. If I don't bleed out first." He laughed, the sound breaking through the exhaustion like sunlight through clouds. "Come on, let's get you patched up properly." They were halfway back to the northern camp, Maeve leaning heavily on Alistair's solid strength, when Rebecca Frost called out, "Sterling, wait!" Maeve turned carefully, every movement painful. The old woman was standing alone, her 7,000 wolves already beginning the long march back to Eastern Territory. But she'd stayed behind. "That was either the most brilliant political maneuver I've seen in 70 years or the most suicidal," Rebecca said. "I still can't decide which." "Why not both?" Maeve managed a weak smile. Rebecca studied her for a long moment. "Your family killed my parents, my siblings, half my original pack when I was barely 20 years old. I've spent 70 years making sure nothing like the Sterling reign could ever happen again. building walls, making alliances, preparing for the day when someone would try to bring it all back. I know, Maeve said quietly, but you're not them. Rebecca's voice was thoughtful, almost gentle. You had absolute power over 3,000 wolves, power your family would have killed for, and you just let them go. Your ancestors would never have done that. They'd have tightened their grip until every wolf on this continent was bound to them. My family are dead because they couldn't imagine any other way to rule, Maeve said. True enough. Rebecca paused. This Grand Council you're proposing, will it have real power, or is it just theater to make the lower packs feel included while you make all the actual decisions? Real power, Maeve said firmly, despite the exhaustion making her sway. Every pack gets a vote. Major decisions require majority approval. No single territory can dominate the others. Even the northern territories? Even you? Especially me, Maeve said. I don't want to be a sovereign. I want to be a participant in something better. Rebecca's laugh was sharp, but not unkind. You really are insane, but I like it. She extended her hand, weathered and scarred from a lifetime of fighting. The Eastern Coalition will support you. We'll send our best people to help draft the new laws. But if you betray this, if you try to become what your family was, I'll kill you myself. Slowly. Are we absolutely clear on that? Maeve took her hand, feeling the strength in that iron grip. Crystal clear. Good. Rebecca released her. Now go get those wounds properly treated before you pass out and undo all the dramatic impact of your surrender. You look like warmed over death. I feel like it. That's what happens when you fight a 93-year-old wolf in single combat. Rebecca's smile was fierce. Next time, try the radical diplomacy approach first. Saves everyone a lot of blood. She walked away, leaving Maeve staring after her in exhausted amazement. Did that really just happen? Maeve asked. I think so, Alistair said. Though I'm half convinced I'm hallucinating from stress. You and me both. The journey back to the Northern Palace took 3 days. Maeve spent most of it unconscious, her body finally crashing completely after running on nothing but adrenaline and stubborn will for too long. When she finally woke up, she was in her chambers, the rooms that had belonged to Dominic, now hers by right of conquest and revolution, with Alistair sitting in a chair beside the bed looking like he hadn't slept since the conclave. Hey, she said. Her voice came out as a croak. Hey yourself. He leaned forward immediately, taking her hand like it was precious. You've been out for almost 48 hours. We were getting worried. What did I miss? Oh, just complete political upheaval and the birth of a new governmental system. Alistair's smile was tired but genuine. Marcus Ashford has been formally arrested for treason and conspiracy. Gregory's taken over as interim council head until we can figure out proper elections. Representatives from 15 different packs have already arrived for the first official Grand Council session. Rebecca Frost sent 3 of her best legal scholars to help draft the founding documents. And apparently, you're a folk hero now. A what? The Omega who became queen and then immediately gave up absolute power to establish democracy. The servants are writing songs about you. The younger wolves are calling it the Silver Revolution. He squeezed her hand. You're a symbol now. Hope for a better world and all that. Maeve groaned and covered her face with her free hand. That's horrifying. That's politics. Alistair's voice was gentle. How do you actually feel, physically? Like I got mauled by a geriatric wolf and then gave away my ability to heal from it properly. Accurate on both counts. He sobered. You scared me. When you yielded, when you released all those bonds at once, I thought you'd lost your mind, thought I was going to watch you die for your principles. Maybe I did lose my mind a little. No. His voice was firm now, certain. You did what no Sterling has ever done. You chose people over power, justice over dominance. It was brave and terrifying and probably insane, and I've never been more proud of anyone in my entire life. The mate bond hummed with emotion too big for words, love and pride and fierce protectiveness all tangled together. Maeve felt tears prickling at her eyes. I love you too, she said quietly, in case that wasn't completely obvious. Alistair's face broke into a genuine smile, transforming his scarred features. It's obvious now. He kissed her then, careful of her injuries, gentle and reverent. For a moment everything else fell away. The politics and the Grand Council and the impossible task of rebuilding an entire social structure from scratch. There was just this. Just them. Just the bond between them that had somehow become the only thing she was absolutely certain about. A knock on the door broke them apart. "Come in," Maeve called, sitting up carefully. Serena entered carrying a tray of food. She changed again, not back to servant's clothes, but not to her old finery either. Something in between. Practical, but well made. Her bruises were fading to yellow-green. "You're awake," Serena said. "Good. The council's asking when you'll be well enough to attend sessions. They have about 700 questions, and nobody wants to make decisions without you." "Tomorrow," Maeve said. "Maybe the day after. How bad is it really? Honestly?" Serena set the tray down carefully. "It's complete chaos. Half the packs want full democracy with equal votes. The other half think you're giving away too much power and will end up with mob rule. Everyone's arguing about representation formulas and whether territories should get votes based on population or land size. The Eastern scholars and the Northern traditionalists are barely speaking to each other, and there are at least 3 different proposals for how to handle the Omega protection laws you mentioned." "That's actually good," Maeve said, reaching for a piece of bread. "Means they're engaged. Means they care enough to fight about it." "If you say so." Serena paused, then added quietly, "My father's demanding a trial. Says he was acting in the Northern Territory's best interests the entire time." "Of course he is," Maeve sighed. "We'll deal with him, fairly, according to whatever laws we manage to establish, which don't exist yet. Then we'd better get started writing them." Serena's smile was small but real. "You know this is going to take years, right? Maybe decades. Changing this much, this fast, undoing 10,000 years of tradition. It's going to be messy and complicated, and there will be massive setbacks." "I know," Maeve said, "but at least we're trying. At least we're building something instead of just maintaining the same broken system." "Fair enough." Serena moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I think you could actually be a good queen, if you stopped trying so hard to prove you're not weak and just focused on doing the work." She left before Maeve could respond. Over the next 2 weeks, Maeve recovered enough to attend the first official Grand Council sessions. They were held in the Great Hall, the same room where Dominic had rejected her barely a month ago, though it felt like a lifetime. But the space had been completely transformed. The throne platform was gone, torn down. In its place sat a massive round table that had taken 12 carpenters 3 days to build. 40 chairs arranged in a circle, one for each major pack territory currently represented. Maeve took her seat among them. Not at any head position. There was no head to a round table. Just another voice among many. Just another representative trying to figure out how to make this impossible dream actually work. Rebecca Frost sat almost directly across from her, looking amused by the whole thing. Marcus Wolfe was 3 seats to her left, engaged in what looked like a heated but productive argument with one of the Eastern scholars. Pack leaders from territories Maeve had never even heard of filled the other seats, all talking at once, all trying to make themselves heard. The room buzzed with conversation, argument, the messy, beautiful chaos of wolves trying to actually govern themselves instead of just following the strongest alpha. "First order of business," Gregory Chen announced from his position as temporary moderator, "establishing formal voting procedures and representation formulas." "One pack, one vote," someone called out immediately. "Keep it simple." "That's fundamentally unfair to larger packs," another voice argued. "Why should a territory with 500 wolves have the same influence as one with 5,000? Because otherwise the big territories will just dominate everything. Population should absolutely matter. What about land size? What about economic contribution? What about historical significance?" The argument exploded across the table like a bomb going off. 40 voices all trying to talk over each other, each convinced their proposal was the obviously correct one. It was chaos. Beautiful, democratic chaos. Maeve sat back and listened, resisting the bone-deep urge to impose order through dominance. This was what she'd wanted, what she'd fought for. The messy reality of actually sharing power instead of hoarding it. Alistair caught her eye from his position near the wall where he stood with the other generals and advisors. He was grinning openly. "What?" she mouthed. "You," he mouthed back, looking very not like a tyrant. She fought down a smile and turned her attention back to the argument, which had somehow evolved into a debate about whether pack age should factor into voting weight. The arguments continued for hours. They solved exactly nothing that first day, or the second, or the third, but slowly, painfully, something was taking shape. Not the sterling empire of old, not the comfortable tyranny of the strong dominating the weak. Something genuinely new. 1 week after the first Grand Council session, Maeve stood on the palace walls at sunset, watching the sun paint the northern forest in shades of gold and crimson. Spring was definitely coming now. She could smell it in the air, new growth, melting snow, the promise of renewal and change. "They're still calling you the Silver Sovereign," Alistair said, joining her at the wall. "Even though you keep telling them not to." "I know. Apparently I can change governmental systems but not catchy nicknames. It's because you're the queen who refused to be queen. It's romantic, inspiring." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned back against the solid warmth of him. "How are you feeling? And I want a real answer, not the diplomatic one you give the council." Maeve considered, watching the sun sink lower. "Scared," she admitted finally. This could all still fall apart. The Grand Council could dissolve into permanent infighting. The old powers could reassert themselves through manipulation instead of force. We could fail spectacularly and end up with something worse than what we started with. "We could," Alistair agreed calmly. "Or we could succeed. Actually build something that lasts. Change the world for the better." "No pressure." He laughed against her hair. "You literally overthrew a kingdom in under 2 weeks and established a completely new system of government. I think you can handle a little political uncertainty." Maeve turned in his arms to face him properly. This scarred warrior who'd become her anchor, her partner, her mate in every way that mattered. "I couldn't do any of this without you," she said seriously. "You know that, right? Good thing you don't have to." He kissed her forehead. "We're in this together. Whatever comes." Below them, in the Great Hall, the Grand Council was in session again. 40 packs arguing about trade agreements and territory disputes, and the 1,000 small, crucial details of actually governing themselves. It was loud, chaotic, frustrating, imperfect. It was absolutely beautiful. "Come on," Maeve said, reluctantly pulling away from the comfort of his embrace. "We should get back. They're voting on the Omega Protection proposal today." "You mean they're going to argue about the Omega Protection proposal for 6 more hours and then table it for further discussion?" Alistair corrected with a grin. "That too." They headed back inside together, and Maeve felt something she hadn't felt since before the rebellion that killed her family. Maybe something she'd never truly felt before in her entire life. Hope. Real, genuine hope for a better future. She was still the last sterling. Still carried the weight of 10,000 years of bloody history, still had enemies who'd love to see her fail. But she wasn't facing any of it alone anymore. And she wasn't trying to be what her family had been, distant, dominating, untouchable. She was building something new, something messy and imperfect and gloriously democratic. And for the first time since this whole impossible journey had started, Maeve actually believed they might pull it off. 6 months later, she wasn't so sure anymore. The Grand Council chamber, no longer the Great Hall, they'd built a new structure specifically for this purpose, was in chaos. Again. 40 representatives shouting over each other, accusations flying, old resentments bubbling to the surface like poison from an infected wound. Completely unacceptable that the Eastern Territories get veto power. "We don't have veto power. We have proportional representation based on," which is just another way of saying the big packs control everything. If you'd actually read the proposal instead of reacting emotionally, "Don't you dare condescend to me!" Maeve sat at the round table and wanted to scream, or cry, or possibly both. 6 months of this. 6 months of arguments that went in circles, of compromises that satisfied no one, of progress measured in inches when they needed miles. The shining hope of the conclave felt very far away right now. "Order!" Gregory Chen called out, though his voice was getting hoarse from overuse. "Please, can we maintain some semblance of—" "This is a waste of time," Marcus Wolf said, standing abruptly. The big warrior looked frustrated and tired. "We've been arguing about the same voting structure for 3 weeks. Meanwhile, the border dispute between the Northern and Western territories is escalating toward actual violence. The Omega protection laws are stalled in committee, and half the smaller packs are threatening to withdraw because they don't feel heard. Then maybe we should simplify the voting structure, Rebecca Frost said. She looked older than she had at the conclave, the last 6 months clearly wearing on her too. One pack, one vote. Clean, simple, democratic. And completely unfair, someone from the Southern delegation argued. My pack has 8,000 wolves. Territory 12 has 300. Why should we have equal influence? Because that's what democracy means. No, that's what mob rule means. The argument exploded again. Maeve closed her eyes and tried to breathe through the headache building behind her temples. This wasn't working. 6 months in, and they were further from consensus than ever. The idealism of the conclave had run headfirst into the messy reality of implementation, and it was dying slowly in a conference room. Enough. Maeve's voice wasn't loud, but something in it made everyone stop. The dominance she'd sworn not to use anymore, bleeding through despite her best efforts. The room went silent. We're taking a recess, she said. 24 hours. Everyone go back to your quarters, get some sleep. Remember why we're doing this. We reconvene tomorrow at dawn. Your Majesty, we really need to resolve someone started. Tomorrow, Maeve repeated, and this time there was no mistaking the command in her voice. Dismissed. They filed out slowly, still arguing in small groups, carrying their grievances with them like treasured possessions. When the last of them had gone, Maeve put her head down on the table and let out a long, shaky breath. That bad? Alistair's voice came from the doorway. Worse. She didn't lift her head. I'm failing. This whole thing is falling apart, and I don't know how to fix it. She felt him move closer, felt his hand settle warm and steady on her shoulder. You're not failing. You're learning. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like I gave up absolute power for the privilege of watching everyone tear each other apart verbally instead of physically. At least they're talking instead of killing each other. Some days I wonder if that's actually better. Maeve finally lifted her head. 6 months, Alistair. 6 months and we haven't passed a single major piece of legislation. The voting structure is deadlocked. The Omega protections are stuck. The border disputes are getting worse. And I can't just force them to agree because that would make me exactly what I said I wouldn't be. So you're learning that democracy is hard and messy and frustrating, Alistair said. Welcome to what every government in history has figured out eventually. Very helpful. I'm being serious. He pulled out a chair and sat beside her. You thought giving up the sovereign command would solve everything. That once you weren't forcing people to obey, they'd magically work together for the common good. But people are people. They have different interests, different priorities, different ideas about what's fair. I know that. Do you? Because you're acting like their inability to instantly agree on everything is a personal failure on your part. His gray eyes were gentle but honest. You can't make them want the same things, Maeve. All you can do is give them a structure to work through their differences without killing each other, which is exactly what you've done. A structure that isn't working. A structure that's 6 months old trying to replace 10,000 years of tyranny. Give it time. Maeve wanted to argue, but she was too tired. The weight of 6 months of frustration sat heavy on her shoulders. She'd been so sure that creating the Grand Council would be the hard part, that once it existed, once everyone had a voice, the rest would follow naturally. She'd been naive. There's something else, Alistair said carefully. Something you need to see. He pulled a letter from his jacket, placed it on the table. The seal was broken, but Maeve could still see the crest. 3 wolves circling a crown. The Southern Coalition. They're calling for a vote of no confidence, Alistair said. 15 packs have signed on. They want to dissolve the Grand Council and return to the old territorial system. Maeve's stomach dropped. 15? That's more than a third of the total membership. I know. If they withdraw, the whole thing collapses. The Eastern and Western territories will see it as proof the system doesn't work. Rebecca will probably pull her support. And then we're right back where we started, except now there's bad blood between everyone and… Maeve. Alistair's hand found hers. Breathe. She tried. Failed. Tried again. The panic was rising, cold and suffocating. She'd risked everything for this, had given up the power that could have kept her safe, had bet her entire future on the idea that wolves could govern themselves if given the chance. And it was failing. I need to talk to them, she said, standing abruptly. The Southern Coalition. If I can just explain, They don't want explanations, they want results. Alistair stood too. And you can't give them results when the council can't agree on anything. Then what do I do? I don't know, he admitted. But running to them desperate and panicking isn't going to help. He was right. Maeve knew he was right, but knowing it didn't make the fear any less real. That night she couldn't sleep. She walked the palace halls like a ghost, past rooms where she'd once served, past the kitchens where she'd scrubbed pots until her hands bled. Everything had changed. Nothing had changed. She was queen now instead of a servant, but she was still just one person trying to fix a broken world and failing. She found herself in the old council chamber, the one they'd used before building the new Grand Council building. It was empty now, dusty from disuse. The portraits of former kings still lined the walls, watching her with painted eyes. You look lost, Maeve spun. Dominic stood in the doorway, looking haggard and older than his years. Without his wolf, he'd aged rapidly, the vitality that came from the beast within simply gone. He was still wealthy, still technically a lord, but he was a shadow of the Alpha King he'd been. What do you want? Maeve's voice came out harsher than she intended. I heard about the Southern Coalition. He moved into the room slowly, like approaching a dangerous animal. 15 packs calling for dissolution. That's bad. Thanks for the observation. I'm not here to gloat. Dominic stopped a respectful distance away. Believe it or not, I don't want to see this fail. Why not? You fought against it from the beginning. Because I was an idiot. His laugh was bitter. You were my fated mate, and I rejected you for politics, for power, for all the wrong reasons. And now I get to spend the rest of my life as half a person, watching you try to build something better than what I had. Maeve studied him. 6 months ago, she would have felt satisfaction at his misery. Now she just felt tired. Why are you really here, Dominic? Because I've been where you are, trying to hold together a kingdom that wants to tear itself apart, trying to make everyone happy and failing. He met her eyes. You know what I learned? You can't make everyone happy. Someone's always going to be disappointed. Someone's always going to think you're doing it wrong. That's not helpful. I'm not done. He moved closer. What I should have learned, but didn't, is that you have to stand for something anyway, even when it's hard, even when people hate you for it. Because if you try to please everyone, you end up standing for nothing. I'm trying to build consensus. You're trying to avoid conflict, Dominic interrupted. There's a difference. You gave up the sovereign command because you didn't want to be a tyrant. But now you're so scared of imposing your will that you won't impose anything at all. You won't take a stand, won't push for what you actually believe in. That's not... When's the last time you actually voted in the Grand Council? Dominic asked. When's the last time you said, this is what I think is right, instead of just trying to mediate everyone else's arguments? Maeve opened her mouth, closed it. She couldn't remember. You're the queen, Dominic said quietly. Like it or not, people look to you for leadership. Not dictatorship, not tyranny, but leadership. Direction. Vision. And you're so busy trying not to be your family that you've forgotten how to be yourself. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, I think what you're trying to do is noble. Probably necessary. But noble ideas don't implement themselves. Someone has to fight for them. Even when, especially when, it's hard. He left Maeve standing alone among the portraits of dead kings, his words echoing in the empty room. The next morning, Maeve called an emergency session of the Grand Council. Everyone came, though the tension was palpable. The Southern Coalition sat together on one side of the round table, their body language defensive and closed off. The rest scattered around, uncertain, waiting to see which way this would go. I've heard about this vote of no confidence, Maeve said without preamble. 15 packs want to dissolve this council and return to the old ways. Before we take that vote, I want to say something. She stood, and 40 pairs of eyes turned to her. 6 months ago, I gave up absolute power because I thought it was the right thing to do. Because I believed wolves could govern themselves if given the chance. I still believe that, but I've been doing this wrong. Confused murmurs rippled around the table. I've been so scared of becoming a tyrant that I've refused to lead at all. I've tried to stay neutral on every issue, to let you all work it out yourselves, to never impose my own vision. And that was a mistake. Your Majesty, Gregory started. Let me finish. Maeve took a breath. Democracy doesn't mean no one leads. It means leaders can be questioned, challenged, replaced if they fail. But there still have to be leaders, people willing to stand up and say, "This is what I believe is right," and fight for it. She looked at the Southern Coalition delegates. "You want to dissolve this council because it's not working. You're right, it's not working. We've spent 6 months arguing in circles and accomplishing nothing. But that's not because democracy is impossible. It's because we're all too scared to actually commit to anything." "That's easy for you to say," one of the Southern delegates said. "You're not the one being told your pack doesn't matter because you're too small." "You're right," Maeve agreed. "I'm not. And here's what I think we should do about it." She pulled out a document, something she'd been working on all night, fueled by Dominic's words and her own growing frustration. A hybrid system. Every pack gets one baseline vote, regardless of size. That's non-negotiable. Every wolf pack has inherent worth and deserves representation. She placed the document in the center of the table. But for certain issues, major territorial decisions, war declarations, things that affect everyone, we add weighted votes based on population. The big packs get more influence on the big issues. The small packs maintain their voice on everything else. "That's not pure democracy," someone started. "No, it's not," Maeve interrupted. "It's a compromise. It's messy and complicated and probably still not perfect. But it's better than what we have now, which is nothing. And it's better than what we had before, which was tyranny." She looked around the table, meeting eyes, refusing to flinch. "I'm putting this to a vote, right now. Not a discussion, not a committee review, not another 3 weeks of debate. A vote. And when it's done, whether it passes or fails, we're moving on to the next issue. Because we can't spend forever on perfect and let good enough die while we argue." "You can't just," someone protested. "I can," Maeve said. "I'm still the queen. I still have authority to call votes. And I'm using it. All in favor?" Silence. Shocked, uncertain silence. Then Rebecca Frost raised her hand. "Aye." Marcus Wolfe followed. "Aye." Gregory Chen was next. "Aye." One by one, hands rose. Not all of them, some of the Southern Coalition kept their hands down, stubborn and angry, but more than half the council voted yes. "Motion passes," Maeve said. "We have a voting structure. Gregory, work with the legal committee to draft the specific implementation. I want it ready for review in 1 week." She looked at her notes. "Next item. The Omega protection laws have been in committee for 4 months. Here's what I'm proposing." She outlined it quickly, clearly, the framework she'd developed over months of listening to arguments. Not perfect. Not everything everyone wanted, but something real. Something they could actually implement. "Vote," she said when she was done. "All in favor?" This time there was less hesitation. The hands rose faster. "Passes. Next item." They worked through the agenda for 6 straight hours. Maeve pushed them, refused to let arguments spiral into philosophical debates called votes when discussion became circular. Not tyranny, people could still vote no, could still argue against her proposals, but leadership, direction, the thing that had been missing. By the time they broke for dinner, they'd passed more legislation than in the previous 6 months combined. The Southern Coalition asked for a private meeting. Maeve met them in a smaller conference room, just her and Alistair and the 15 pack leaders who'd signed the no-confidence letter. She expected anger, accusations. Instead, she got something more complicated. "That was interesting," their spokesperson said, an older woman named Sarah Cole. "You basically forced us to vote on things we weren't ready to decide on." "I know," Maeve said. "I'm sorry if—" "Don't apologize." Sarah held up a hand. "It was exactly what we needed. We've been hiding behind more discussion because we were scared to commit. Scared to be on the record supporting something that might fail. You made us stop hiding. So you're withdrawing the no-confidence vote?" "We are." Sarah smiled slightly. "On one condition. You keep doing what you did today. Keep pushing us. Keep calling votes. Keep leading instead of just facilitating." "I thought you wanted democracy." "We do. But democracy needs leaders who aren't afraid to lead. We've got plenty of people who can argue. What we needed was someone willing to say, 'Enough arguing, time to decide.'" After they left, Maeve sat in the empty conference room and tried to process what had just happened. "You did it," Alistair said quietly. "You figured out how to lead without dominating. I forced them to vote on things they weren't ready for. You gave them direction when they were lost. There's a difference. He pulled her close. I'm proud of you. Don't be proud yet. We still have about 700 other problems. True, but today you solved some of them. Tomorrow you'll solve more. That's how this works. The next 6 months were brutal but productive. Maeve pushed the Grand Council harder, called votes more frequently, stopped letting perfect be the enemy of good enough. The Omega protection laws passed. The border dispute system was established. Trade agreements were negotiated. Slowly, painfully, the framework of actual governance emerged. There were setbacks. 3 packs withdrew from the council entirely, declaring they'd rather be independent than compromise. 2 territorial disputes escalated to violence before the new mediation system could stop them. The voting structure Maeve had pushed through needed 3 amendments before it worked properly. But there was also progress. Real, measurable progress. The Omega servant who'd tried to bring Maeve tea on her first day as queen came to her office one afternoon 10 months after the conclave. Her name was Ruth, and she looked terrified. Your Majesty, I wanted to thank you. Maeve looked up from the report she'd been reviewing. For what? The new laws, the Omega protections. Ruth's voice shook. I have Saturdays off now, actual days off. And we get paid real wages, and there's a complaint system if someone mistreats us, and tears spilled down her cheeks. My daughter won't have to grow up the way I did. Thank you. After Ruth left, Maeve sat at her desk and cried for 10 minutes straight. Because that was why this mattered. Not the grand political theory, not the structure of government, the real people whose lives were changing. 1 year after the conclave, they held the first democratic elections for council positions. Not all of them. Maeve had insisted on a gradual transition. But 10 seats were now subject to actual votes by pack members, instead of hereditary or appointment. 6 of the 10 went to completely new representatives. Younger wolves, Omegas, people who'd never have had a voice under the old system. Marcus Ashford was convicted of treason and conspiracy. The trial took 3 months and was conducted according to laws the Grand Council had written specifically for this purpose. Serena testified against him, her voice steady, outlining every deal he'd made, every betrayal he'd committed. I loved you, she said from the witness stand, looking at her father. I wanted to make you proud, but you taught me that power matters more than people, that winning matters more than being right, and I'm done learning those lessons. Marcus was sentenced to exile, stripped of his titles and lands, forbidden from holding any position of authority, sent to live in a remote territory under supervision, not execution. The Grand Council had outlawed capital punishment in one of their early votes, despite significant opposition. We're trying to build something better, Maeve had argued. That means being better than those who came before us, even when it's hard. Serena came to the palace after the sentencing. Thank you, she said quietly, for not killing him, for giving him a chance to live differently. Will he take it? Maeve asked. Probably not. Serena's smile was sad. But at least we gave him the choice. That's more than the old system would have done. She paused, then added, I've been elected to represent the Northern Territories in the next council session. I heard. Congratulations. I'm going to fight you on probably half your policies. Good, Maeve said. That's what democracy looks like. 18 months after the conclave, Maeve stood in the Grand Council chamber and watched 40 representatives argue about tax policy. It should have been boring. Instead, it was beautiful. They were arguing about how to fund infrastructure improvements in the smaller territories. The big packs wanted proportional contribution based on population. The small packs wanted flat rates. It was complicated and contentious, and no one was going to be completely happy with whatever they decided. It was perfect. Rebecca Frost caught Maeve's eye and smiled. The old woman was retiring soon, had announced she was stepping down to let younger wolves take over the Eastern Coalition. I'm 94 years old, she'd said. Time to let someone else do the fighting. But before she left, she'd pulled Maeve aside. You did it, Rebecca said. You actually built something that might last. Might being the key word. Might is all we ever get in this world. Rebecca's weathered face was serious. But you gave us a chance, a real one. That's more than I ever expected from a Sterling. I'm not my family. No, you're better. Rebecca gripped her shoulder. Don't forget that when things get hard again, because they will get hard. Democracy is constant work, constant compromise, constant frustration, but it's still better than the alternative. That evening, Maeve and Alistair walked through the forest near the palace. It was late spring again, 2 years almost to the day since Dominic had rejected her in the grand hall, since her entire life had exploded and reformed into something unrecognizable. "Do you ever regret it?" Alistair asked. "Giving up the sovereign command, the absolute power?" Maeve thought about it honestly. "Sometimes, when the council is being impossible and I know I could just force them to agree. When I'm exhausted from arguing and compromising and nothing feels like enough." She took his hand. "But then I remember Ruth crying in my office because her daughter will have a better life. Or I watch Serena stand up to her father even though it terrified her. Or I see new representatives elected who would never have had a voice before. And I know I made the right choice, even though it's harder. Especially because it's harder." She stopped, turned to face him. "The easy thing would have been to keep the power, to force everyone to do what I wanted. But easy isn't always right. And I'd rather struggle to build something good than succeed at maintaining something broken." Alistair kissed her, soft and sweet in the fading light. "Have I mentioned that I love you? Once or twice?" "Well, I do. Even when you're being impossibly idealistic about government reform." "Especially then, I hope." "Especially then," he agreed. They walked back toward the palace, where lights were beginning to glow in the windows. The Grand Council would meet again tomorrow. There would be more arguments, more compromises, more frustration. The work of building a better world was never finished, but it was worth doing anyway. 5 years after the conclave, Maeve stood in the same stone circle where she'd fought Rebecca Frost, where she'd yielded instead of won, where she'd given up everything and somehow gained more than she'd ever imagined. They'd gathered here to commemorate the anniversary, representatives from every pack in the Grand Council, plus observers from territories that hadn't yet joined but were considering it. Hundreds of wolves standing in the mountain air, watching as Maeve prepared to speak. She looked out at them and saw change. Saw Omega representatives standing proud instead of hiding in shadows. Saw young wolves who'd grown up under the new system, who didn't remember what it was like when might made right and power was something you took instead of earned. Saw hope. 5 years ago, Maeve began, I stood in this circle and fought for dominance, for control, for the right to rule you through force and fear. And I lost. Or I thought I lost, because I didn't understand yet that losing that fight was the only way to win what actually mattered. She paused, gathering her thoughts. My family ruled for 10,000 years through absolute power, through magic that turned free wolves into slaves, through dominance that crushed any dissent, and they're gone now, torn down by wolves who were tired of being controlled, who wanted to be free. But freedom isn't easy. It's not simple. It requires constant work, constant compromise, constant willingness to listen to people you disagree with and find common ground anyway. It means accepting that you won't always get what you want, that sometimes the best solution is one nobody loves but everyone can live with. She looked at Alistair, standing near the front with the other generals, at Serena, now a full council member and one of Maeve's fiercest opponents on economic policy, at Gregory, who'd guided them through 1,000 impossible votes, at Rebecca Frost, ancient and proud, who'd taken a chance on a girl with more ideals than sense. 5 years ago, I gave up absolute power because I thought it was the right thing to do. Today, I know it was. Not because the system we built is perfect, it's not. Not because everyone's happy, they're not. But because we're building something together instead of having it forced on us. Because every wolf in this council has a voice, even when that makes everything complicated and messy and slow. Because freedom is worth the frustration, worth the compromise, worth the constant work of maintaining it. She took a breath. My family's motto was power above all. They ruled through dominance and died for it. The new motto, the one we chose together in the Grand Council last year, is unity through choice. Not unity through force, not unity through chains, unity because we choose it, every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. The wolves assembled began to howl, not in submission, not in fear, but in agreement, in celebration. The sound rose and echoed off the mountains, carrying across the territories, a promise and a challenge and a hope all woven together. Maeve stepped down from the speaking stone and walked into Alistair's waiting arms. Good speech, he murmured against her hair. I practiced. I know. I heard you practicing at 3 in the morning. She laughed and held him tighter. 5 years. 5 years of impossible work and constant frustration and slow, grinding progress. 5 years of building something better from the ruins of something broken. It wasn't finished. It would never be finished. Democracy wasn't a destination you reached and then stopped. It was a process. A constant choice to keep trying, keep working, keep believing that people could govern themselves if given the chance. But they were doing it. That evening, Maeve returned to the palace and walked past the kitchens where she'd once scrubbed pots until her hands bled. Ruth was there, supervising a staff of servants who worked 8-hour shifts and got paid fair wages and had actual rights. She saw Maeve and smiled. "Your Majesty, working late?" "Always," Maeve said. "How are things down here?" "Good. Really good." Ruth's smile widened. "My daughter's starting school next month, the new Omega education program. She's going to learn to read and write, maybe even go into government work someday." "She'll be brilliant at it," Maeve said. After Ruth returned to work, Maeve stood in the kitchen doorway and let herself feel the weight of what they'd accomplished. Not perfect, not finished, but real, measurable, important. She climbed the stairs to her chambers, no longer Dominic's chambers, truly hers now, and found Alistair already there, reviewing military reports. "The Southern Coalition sent new proposals for the border security system," he said without looking up. "They're actually pretty good. I think we should support them. Even though they're basically the opposite of what we proposed last month. Even though." He finally looked at her and grinned. "Democracy, remember? Sometimes other people have good ideas too." Shocking. Maeve changed out of her formal clothes into something comfortable, joined Alistair on the couch where he was working. They sat together in comfortable silence, her reading through trade proposals while he made notes on military readiness reports. The work of governance. The endless, exhausting, absolutely necessary work of maintaining a society that actually valued its people. "I have something to tell you," Maeve said eventually. Alistair looked up. "Good something or bad something?" "Unexpected something." She took his hand, pressed it to her stomach. "We're going to have a baby." His eyes went wide. "Are you really?" "Really." The healer confirmed it this morning. Alistair's face broke into the biggest smile she'd ever seen from him. He pulled her close, kissed her deeply, pulled back to look at her with wonder. "A baby. We're having a baby." "We are." Maeve felt tears prickling at her eyes. A child who'll grow up in a world where Omegas have rights, where power is shared instead of hoarded, where their mother is queen not because she dominated everyone, but because she helped build something worth leading. "They're going to be amazing," Alistair said. "They're going to be loved," Maeve corrected. "The rest we'll figure out as we go." Later, lying in bed with Alistair's arms around her and their child growing inside her, Maeve thought about everything that had led to this moment. The rejection that had broken her, the power that had nearly corrupted her, the choice to let go and build something better. It hadn't been smooth, hadn't been easy, hadn't been anything like the stories where the hero triumphs and everything magically becomes perfect. But it had been real, and it had been worth it. Because real change, lasting change, wasn't about one dramatic moment of revolution. It was about 1,000 small choices, 1,000 compromises, 1,000 times choosing to keep trying even when it was hard. It was Ruth's daughter learning to read, Serena finding the courage to stand against her father, new representatives elected to positions that had been hereditary for centuries, laws that protected the weak instead of just empowering the strong. It was progress, slow and messy and imperfect, but real. And tomorrow Maeve would wake up and go back to the Grand Council, where 40 wolves would argue about infrastructure funding or trade policy, or some other incredibly boring but absolutely vital issue. She'd call votes when the arguments got circular. She'd push for compromise when positions got too entrenched. She'd lead without dominating, guide without controlling, prove every single day that there was another way to rule. Not through fear, through hope, not through chains, through choice, the last Sterling, the kitchen servant who became queen, the girl who gave up absolute power and discovered that sometimes losing is the only way to truly win. Maeve closed her eyes and let herself rest, the mate bond with Alistair warm and steady, the new life growing inside her a promise of the future they were building together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new arguments, new problems to solve. But tonight, she could simply be, simply exist in this moment of peace and know that they were creating something that would outlast them both. Something worth fighting for, something worth the struggle, something better. The Silver Sovereign slept and dreamed of a world where power served the people instead of ruling them, where unity came from choice instead of force, where every wolf, alpha, beta, omega, regardless of birth or bloodline, had a voice that mattered. It was a beautiful dream, and every day they were making it a little more real.